What's up everyone, I'm Mohammed Ahsan and this is yet another video on HTML, JavaScript and CSS, and we are going to be using vanilla JavaScript to build a Foodora slash Foodpanda food cart. And what we'll do is that you should be able to add items from a menu and add them to your cart and then see the whole cart, as in the whole price of your order. Let's go.
Hey everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. How's it going today? Welcome to today's stream, which is the JavaScript day 7. And today we are going to talk about more things about JavaScript. Let's see if I can open Foodora and if I can try to find some, or maybe I can go and see Foodpanda. This is what I'm thinking about if I had to, let's say if I find a delivery and then I go here, pick something and then add it to my cart. So we have something here. Let's say we have this cart here. We're gonna build something like this, not exactly like this maybe, but something like this. And then here you could see that we have this situation where we have different buttons and we have some functionality going on here. We have some calculation of the numbers as well, and we have some other things as well. In the DOM manipulation one, what we are going to do is that we're going to have a couple of items in the view, and then we'll try to create a cart, and then we will essentially just see the values in those cards and then kind of manipulate them and remove them. And we'll do that by pure JavaScript. All right, so let's do this. So let's see in this one, what we are going to do is we're going to create a new folder and we are going to say JS DOM manipulation. So here we're going to have an index.html file, and here we are also going to have a main.js file. In the index.html, using Emmet in VS Code, it's super easy. You basically type an exclamation mark and then you hit enter. Boom. We have an index.html with all the goodness of the HTML, head, body, blah, blah, blah. And here we have the script tag as well. So you do a script tag here, and then you essentially, or actually an easier way is to type script and use the script source. And here you can just say main.js. Easy peasy. Now that we have this covered, let's talk about how this would be visualized. So let's say we are going to use something called Bootstrap, and we can quickly include that in our code using Bootstrap CDN. So you go here and then you copy the CSS file, which is just this one. We don't need the JavaScript file so far. So you just copy this and then you paste that in the head here using a link tag. So you type link link, and then you should be able to see CSS, and here in the href you're going to paste this link. So this is a link of type of or rel style sheet, and then you have this link. Now we have Bootstrap involved in our project. So if I have to open this, let's open this actually. So I'm going to go into the file explorer, which is reveal in file explorer, and here I'm going to double click, open this and kind of move it here, remove this, and now we have this. Let's have this title document called, let's say, cart or JS cart. And then here we are also going to have we're going to start with creating a div, and with Emmet it's really easy. If you want to create a div with a class, you can just say dot and the class name, something like this, and you can see that here we have the abbreviation that says div is going to have the class container. So you create it like this. Then you would have, let's say, a heading. So I'll say heading here, and here I would have something like h4 or h3, and here I'm going to say JS cart. Let's do this, refresh this, you see the value here. All right, now we're going to also have some styling to this. So I'm going to create a style.css here. Then I'm going to include that within our code using the link tag for CSS. And here we have the style CSS already written. So I'm going to just link to this, and then we are going to go forward in the code as well. And here now I'm going to style this further. So let's say we have this container, but we also have a class, because this container class is from Bootstrap, which kind of makes everything in the center. So you can see there's a spacing from the left and right. If we don't give this class, then it looks something like this. But if we give this class, then it looks something like this. So we have some spacing out of box, and we could call this a container, and then we call this main as well. And now we are also going to make sure that we have this main set as a display flex. So here we could say main, we could say simply display flex, and here when we refresh it's the same. Then we do a justify content center, and that will make it center just like this. And now we're going to move forward. So let's say we are to create some sort of a cart. So if I click here, this is what we see. We see a couple of items like this. So we have a list item, we have a number here, and then we have this widget which has some buttons. So let's actually create that. So let's say we have two things in the view. First would be the menu itself, and the second one would be the cart itself. So we are going to create two elements inside this further content. So let's say we create a class called content here. Inside this content we have two things, as I said. One is the menu, and the second one is the cart. So we have a menu and a cart. All right, now in this menu we are going to have some list items. So a list and some list items. So let's say we have a list and 5 list items. With emid you could quickly do that by doing dot list, which means a div with class list, and inside we would have a dot list item, and not just one item but actually 5 items. I'm going to also show you something. So that is list item, which are going to be 5, but each list item is going to have two things. We can say item dash text, and we could say something like dot item dash price, and you will see when I hit enter, boom, we got all this amazing HTML created. And if you want to learn it, go watch the video later today and subscribe to the channel if you have not. So we got biryani for that, 387. So 387. Then we have ande wala burger. What ande wala burger is? So I'm gonna type ande wala burger and egg burger together. Then we have what, dal chawal, which is what do you call it that in English? Is it lentil rice? So we got, Usman Khan says dal chawal, then it's 100 per plate. That's good. We got ande wala burger as well as 100. We got one more slot left, guys. Those of you who are not from Pakistan, what is your favorite dish and how much is that? Is it chicken pasta, beef pasta, lamb pasta? I'm gonna go with chicken, and then I'll replace whatever you say. Pasta, and that is 200. Roti seri chicken. All right, so far it looks something like this: chicken pasta, blah 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 blah. Okay, so this is how it looks like so far. What we want is it to be shown in sort of a menu scenario. So we're gonna start styling it, and then here in the cart itself, it should look something like this. Not this, but something like this. It should have a title, the price, and this object here. So we're gonna write some code for that as well. I'm gonna close this so it doesn't confuse you. So we got the menu here, but now we are talking about the cart here. All right, so here we're gonna have, let's say, a cart list. Inside that we're gonna have cart list item, but not just one item, but let's say 2 items for now. And each item is gonna have first the text. So we could say cart item text. Then we have, what did we have further? So we had 2 lines, right? So we had one div, because I'm kind of creating it in my mind. So we have cart item. I'm going to close this actually. So we have cart item title, then we have a cart item price. Let's create this. So now what we have here is that we have a cart. Inside we have a cart list, and each cart list has some cart items, like 2 cart items here. All right, now that we have this, so we have cart item title. Let's copy something from the first one. Let's say chicken pasta. So we have chicken pasta as the first item added to our cart, and then we have one from Sidban, that is rotisserie chicken, if I'm pronouncing it right actually. So it's this one. So I'm gonna open this, put that in the title. We're gonna also have the price of that as well. So let's say we go here back. The chicken pasta was 200, but this is this. So we're gonna put here, we're gonna put 200 here. Now we got some items for this, but I also have to create another div for this button actually, which is this one. So we have this div which has this minus sign, plus sign, and a number. So we're gonna create this div. We're gonna quickly create this div. So we are gonna say this is a div. Inside that we have essentially 3 things. So the first thing is we have let's say action. Let's call it actions. So inside this actions div we have action left, then we have something called quantity. So we have quantity, and then we have action right. It might seem like I'm hacking right now, but trust me, I am. So let's say the quantity is 1, and then we have this plus sign here. So we have this actions here right after this div. Let's give this div a class as well. We can call it card item primary, and then I'm going to give this class as well to this one, and you're going to see how this works when we save this and try this out. All right, so we got a lot of things with HTML CSS. So here we have JS card chicken pasta. One of the things that we need to do in this main is, you can see that right now these are side by side, left and right, and that is because we are using display flex. If we remove that, refresh, you can see that they are now on top of each other. So we still want display flex, but we don't want them to be side by side. For that, we can change the flex direction to column. Once we do that, they come on top of each other, but they are still display flex. That is fine. But we also want them to be centered. So now instead of justify content, we're going to do align item center, since we changed the direction. So here we got this. Now, apart from this thing that we did, we also need to make sure that we have this content, and these menu are shown side by side on left and right. So this content also has to be display flex. So I'm going to say content, and then I'm going to say display flex. So now if I refresh, you see these side by side. Good. We are going in the right direction. We're going to also give this a margin top of, let's say, 30 pixel. We're going to also give this main a margin top of 30 pixels as well. So it looks something like this. Then we have the menu and the cart. So let's say for the menu, we just use a simple CSS. And now that I think about it, we could have used the bootstrap list elements as well. Let's actually do that. So we have bootstrap, since we actually included that, and inside we should go to components, and then we should have something called list. So in the layout, we have breakpoints, and then in the components, we should have something called list group. Yeah, exactly. So I was more looking for this one. So we have a list group, and then we have a list group item. So I'm going to go and put these classes so they look like list. So I'm going to go to my HTML, and here inside in this list, so I'm going to replace this list, or actually list item, with the new class, which is list group item. All right. And then with all these list instances, I'm going to replace them with list group. All right. Now, if I save this and refresh, you see that now we got this list in a really nice way. All right. Now, the next thing is to make sure that we show a name on the left and this 200 on the right side. And in order to do so, what we would do is that we're going to go here and change this list group, or actually this list group item, and style this. Now, this list group item is essentially a class from Bootstrap. You should not be just going into CSS and typing this, because then it would replace every instance of, or every usage of list group item in your entire application. So you don't want that. What you want to say is that, hey, I have a content inside menu, or content, and then menu, and then list group, and then list group item. So we are only targeting this list group item within this whole hierarchy. So the way you do that is that you define all of these things. So you say something like, hey, I have content, inside I have menu, inside I have list group, and inside I have list group item. And that is what I want to style, not just this entire class on the whole application. So when you do that, you're going to make it display flex. And once you do and save this, you see that now they're side by side. So in order to make sure that you have this, there's a space between these two things, since we are using display flex, we can use something called justify content space between. When we do this and refresh, you see that all this text is on the right side and this text is on the left side, and we have a space between these two things. And that is essentially what we wanted. Now, one of the things that we want to do also is to make sure that this is sort of responsive. So we're going to make this list or menu, this content menu, and this content cart. So we have two things here. One is this content menu, and then second is this cart. So here you can see that inside content, we have a menu and a cart. And here we're going to say, hey, this max width should be 50%. So when we do this, you see that it takes 50% now. So now that we have got this whole situation here, we got 50% here, 50% here. You can see that now they're distributed. Now we also want a margin in between these two. So we could do something like here, we could say margin 0, which means we are not giving any margin from top and bottom, but on the left and right side, we're gonna say 8 pixel. And here, when we refresh, you see that we got a gap here. All right. So we got a gap here. Now, what can we do further? For this whole card, we're going to design it in a way that it looks a bit different. So what we are going to do here is that in the HTML here, we're going to add one heading as well. So here we could say something like H4, and here we could say menu. Save this, refresh, you see the menu here. Similarly, we're going to go in the cart here, and then here we're going to say cart, and here we have the cart. And now we have this working here. Now, in order to kind of make it look something like this card, we need to do some changes. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to outline this whole card with a color. So here I'm going to say, now I'm going to style the card. So I'm going to say content card. This card essentially has to have a background color of, let's say, EEE. Then it's going to have a border of 1 pixel solid. Let's call it DC, DC, DC. And then here we're going to say, we're not going to say anything. Let's first see if this works. So here you can see now it has a really good background here. I'm not sure if it's really good, but I'm going to change that to something like this, maybe a bit lighter. So here we have sort of a background here. Now, if I just do this, you can see it's really sharp. Like the edges here are really sharp, but the edges here are a bit different. So kind of let's make them the same so they look consistent throughout the application. So if I see this list group item, I can see the computed value from here. So I can go here and check the computed value, and here I can see what is the border radius. So if I go down, we should be able to see border top left radius, which is 4 pixel, and top right radius is 4 pixel. So the border radius essentially on this list item is 4 pixels. So now I can just simply say here border radius, and here I can say 4 pixel. And if I refresh now, they both look the same. A win-win for us, right? Now that we have this kind of sort out a bit, we now have to style this whole content where we have these elements. So first of all, we are going to style this cart list item, which is cart list group item. This one, we could have styled them just like the list items as well, or we could do something else. I'm going to remove the background color. So it looks something like this. I'm going to add some padding. Let's say a padding of 5 pixels. So we got something like this. Actually, I'm going to say 10 pixels. So it looks something like this. And I'm going to actually make sure that these two headings are exactly at the same point. So I'm going to remove this padding 10 pixel and change this to 0.10 pixel. So it looks something like this, or maybe even 20 pixels. All right, so it looks like this now. What changed? All right, let's see. I think I'm doing something. So we got content here. All right, we did a display flex, but we didn't center it. All right, so one of the things that we also need to do is this content should have a justify content set to center. So they are exactly at the center. Now they are. So now let's just style the list items. In the list items, we need to make sure that they are also side by side. So we're going to see what is the class of this cart item. So here you can see that in the cart list group item, we have this class cart item primary. So we're going to target that. So we're going to say cart item primary and display equals flex. And then we are going to say justify content space between. So now you can see that they are side by side. The second thing that we need to do is we need to style these guys. So if we look at the Foodpanda, you can see that this element is always there, but when we hover over it, then it shows some colors. So I'm going to see what colors they are using. So I can use this extension color picker, and I can quickly see the color like this, or just pick a color from here. So let's pick it here. I'm going to go here and create a CSS variable. Let's say we call it, we say root, and here we say primary, and this is the color that we are using. So what we are going to do is we are going to say that this color that we have for the title. So we have cart item primary. So we are going to use the cart item title here. So here we can simply say cart item primary, and then inside we have cart item title. And here we're going to say the color of this one is going to be var, and here we can say primary. And then we can say the font weight of this one is going to be bold.
So when we save this and refresh, you can see that it kind of reflects what we see here at Foodpanda. And then we have some text there that says rupees blah blah blah, and then we have some number. So here what we could have is, in this code we have, let's say, rupees. We could say rupees, but I don't want to make it complex. All right, let's make it complex. So we got a span here that says class, cart, item, currency, which says rupees, and then this is, let's say, NBSP, and then we have another span that has cart, item, price, and then we have this value. Okay, so I'm going to copy this, I'm going to paste this in the previous one, this one, and the price here is 200. All right, saved. Now let's see how this looks. So we have this being shown here right now. We discussed that when we have the cart item primary, we would have the display flags and justify content. So it actually looks like this right now, which is okay. We don't have any problem. I think I should be removing this NBSP. Doesn't look good. We already have a space there. So let's remove this, try this out, and it looks good. Now, what we want to do is we want to have this element, but only shown when we hover over it. We need to show some sort of box shadow. So by default, we are gonna say this actions, which is inside cart item primary. No, it's not inside cart item primary, it's inside cart list group item. So here, because this is cart item primary and this is actions, so here we can say cart item, cart list group item, and actions. They're going to be display flags, and then they are going to have justify content space around, or yeah, let's say around. Save, and now you can see that we have some things here. Now we need to be able to just have one thing, and that is we have to move them at the end of this to kind of look at like what we have for Foodpanda. So we need to provide this a width. So this actions should have a width of, let's say, 100 pixel. So if I do this, and we have the cart item primary as well, we need to do one more thing, which is list group item, which is not there anymore. So we're going to say this guy, the cart list group item, has to have a display flex, and then it would have the flex direction set to column, and then it would have the align items flex in. And this is to make sure that these are aligned towards the right side. Okay, I need to do one more thing, and that is in the cart item primary, we have display flex, and then this should be flex 1. Let me quickly see one thing that I'm confused with, that why is this aligned towards the right side. So we got this cart list group item. Inside this, we have cart item primary, and this should have a width of 100%. Why? So we got this one, cart list group item. This has a flex direction column. Then this has align items flex end. Then we have this one, item primary, which has to have the width of 100%. Yeah, why didn't it work before then? Oh, because we have title now. All right. Cart item primary is this one. So we need this. So if we refresh now, this looks much better. We're going to have some styles configured for this as well. For instance, here we see that we have this white background. When we hover over it, let's try to see what is the background of this guy here. So we have complete white, but this is different because we have a shadow over this. Let's actually see what is the shadow, and we can essentially copy the shadow from here as well. So we go here, we got the box shadow here. All right, so we're gonna go and change this for our code. So for this whole element here with the actions, we are going to write another code. So we are going to say cart list group item, and here actions, but whenever we hover over it, then we are going to apply the box shadow of this thing. So once we refresh and see, you can see now we have the same effect as Foodpanda. One more thing I would like to do is I would like to just put a cursor here. So here we could say cursor pointer, refresh, and now you see the cursor pointer as well. One more thing that I want to do is kind of limit this width of this actions class. So it's 100 pixel right now. I want it to be reduced to somewhat like this. So maybe let's say 70 pixels. I think that's pretty much good for this one. So we save this now. Now that we have all this thing covered,
what I want to do is that whenever I click any of these items, they should go into this cart. All right, right now we don't have that, but we want to do that. So we need to be able to listen to any click handlers on either of these elements. One of the things I want to do is whenever I hover over this, I need to see some feedback that, hey, these elements are clickable. So in the menu, we have each list group and list group item, and we need to say here in the menu that, hey, if we have a content, menu, list group and list group item, and if we hover over it, then we should be changing its color. So we would do something like background color, make it dark color, make it white, but also have a transition. So we say all is 0.2 seconds. Save this, refresh this, and also put a cursor pointer as well. And once we refresh now, you see this is what we get. All right, so we get a really cool transition on the CSS. We could improve this time, so we could make it slow like this. So now it's a bit slower because it goes towards 1 second. Usual number that everyone uses is 300 milliseconds, which is soothing to the eye. So you could use 0.3 seconds or 300 milliseconds, whatever you want to call it. And when you click on this element, then you should be able to access its value here. All right, everyone with me so far? Are you excited about the card itself? Because now we are gonna write some JavaScript. One more thing that I just noticed within this Foodpanda card is that we have some sort of spacing between all these two elements, and we have a bit different here. So we're gonna add some spacing just to make it look a bit better. So we're gonna go here and we are going to say for each list group item within the cart, which is this one, we're gonna add a margin top of 20 pixels. Let's see. So now this looks good. Actually make it 30 pixel, I think. All right, and this element also should have a spacing from the top. So the actions should have a margin top of, let's say, 16 pixels. This looks much better. And the height of this element should be a bit higher as well. So maybe give this a height of, let's see. So if we give this a height of 30 pixel, then it looks something like this. If we make it 40, then it looks something like this, which I think is really good. So we can say height 40 pixel, but then also we need to center it vertically. You can see that this is not vertically centered. So this one would be something like align items centered. And once we do this, they should be centered. All right, now this looks good. I also see that at the bottom, we don't have any spacing. So we need some spacing within the card itself from the bottom. So we can say something like this card should have a padding bottom of 30 pixels. And you can see now we got this. So we either do that, and we also need to say something like, yeah, I think that's fine. So we need to say this card has a padding bottom, and we already have padding, so we can kind of change the code here. So we can say this is the card. So let's try to find this one. So instead of saying, hey, top bottom 0, left right 20, we can say top 0, right 0, bottom 20 pixel, left 20 pixel. And once we do this, we get the exact same result. All right, so now this is much better. All right, now that we have these two things, let's talk about JavaScript. So first of all, we need to make sure that we know which element is being clicked, what is the text inside this element, what is the number inside here, and then we essentially show the value here as well. Okay, so let's quickly begin working on this. So first of all, as you can see, we have this menu, we have the list group item, and then we have these values here. So first thing first, whenever we want to get an element from the DOM, we get them via some elements. For instance, if we have a particular element in this view, let's say, so let's create an element with an ID. So if we have, let's say, a heading or h1, let's say, with an ID, special ID, and let's say this says special. If I save and run this, you get this. So if I wanted to get this element in my JavaScript, what I would do is that I would say const special item, which is just creating a variable. And here we can basically call this, or we can basically execute this by doing document, because the DOM is actually called document object model. And by that, I mean, if you try and type document within console log, you will see that it gives you an object. So what is DOM? That is the first question. DOM is the object representation of your view or your HTML. So here, if I open this, you will see that this shows us HTML, head, body,
but these are not in the context of HTML, but these are in the context of your JavaScript. So I can simply get this body as well. So I could say document.body, and you will see that this is now this element, the body. But I could also find this h1 by doing something like document.body.children. And if I do this, you see that this JavaScript object has this h1 tag and this div as well. So via JavaScript, we are able to access all the elements. So if I had to get this h1, I would do something like document.body.children and the first element, which is at the index 0, and this is our h1. Now that we get this element, we can do a lot with this. For instance, I could say something like const heading equals document.body.children 0. So this is our heading element. And now I can say heading dot attributes, and here you can see that I get an object that says at the 0 key we have ID. So I can actually see what is the value of this element. So this attribute has the name ID, and the value of this ID is a special ID. How do we know? In the HTML we have said ID equals special ID. So if I wanted to change the ID for some reason, I could simply do set attribute, and here I can say the attribute is ID and I want to change it to something else. I could say it something like code brigade. Okay, so if I do this and hit enter, you will see that now if I kind of inspect it, the ID of this h1 has been changed to code brigade, and that is DOM manipulation. DOM is the document object module, and this document object module is a bridge between your JavaScript and your view. All right, and when you use this DOM, you are able to change thing in the HTML on runtime, not from the code or not from your JavaScript file, but you can do it runtime, or not in the beginning, but you can do it runtime when the programming is running or when your user is using your application. Similarly, you could change the text of this element by doing the same thing. So you can do heading dot text content, and here you could say something else. You could say my special heading, blah blah. And you can see that it changes it automatically. So that's how you kind of change values in this whole DOM. Now, not only you can change attributes and inner text, you could also create different elements inside this whole tag. For instance, you could do something like inner HTML, and here you can provide a string as an HTML. So you could say something like a p tag here, and then you could also have a span. So here we are providing a HTML as a string, and we say something like something, and the span could have I am new. All right. So if I do this, this whole text will be replaced by this HTML. All right. So you manipulated your DOM by having this h1 having a p and a span that we just did on runtime using the document object module. Not only that, you could also change the styles of this heading tag. And this is not just for the heading tag, but every tag that you see in your DOM. So you could do something like style, which is a CSS declaration. Now this CSS declaration is actually part of the DOM. For instance, if I hit enter, this is an object which has a lot of styles. So it has background, border, transition, style, whatnot. You could do a lot of things here. So I could say something like heading dot style dot background color, and I could give this a red color. Boom. We have a red heading. How cool is that? Similarly, you could change the text color by using the color property, because that is the CSS property. And this is kind of one-to-one with the CSS property. The only difference is that here in the CSS, when we use background color, we use a dash notation, which is also called kebab case. But here in the JavaScript world, we use the camel case notation, which means the first letter is small, and then for every new word, we have a capital start. So here we could say text should be white. Boom, the color is changed now. You could also change other stuff, like you could say padding. So padding could be something like, let's say 40 pixel, which is top and bottom, but 60 pixel from left and right. Once you do that, boom, we have padding as well. And you can check that just by mouse hovering over it, and you can see that this has a padding applied here. And notice that whatever we have done via JavaScript, this ends up in the element style tab in the CSS. Whatever we apply from CSS remains inside the CSS. But if we apply something from JavaScript that is applied directly on the element itself, ends up in this section where you see the CSS in the styles. And one more important thing is that this style which we apply from JavaScript has the highest priority of being applied, which means that if you have defined styles from your CSS, they will be overridden by whatever you type in JavaScript. For instance, here you can see that we have this content.cart, and this has this color border or border color set to DC DC DC. But if I wanted to change this into something else, I could do that. For instance, if I right click on this, inspect this, this is the cart element we are talking about. So here's the cart, and here's a new tip for you as well. If you want this element to be stored in a variable for you in the debugger, what you can do is that you can just right click, click inspect, click on the element, right click, there's a option that says store as a global variable here at the very bottom. So when you click this, this will create a variable for you named temp1 by default, and you can see that the value of temp1 is the representation of this cart element. And now I can use temp1, which is this div cart, and I can say temp1 dot, and here I can now say style, then I can say border, but not just border, but a border color, because I'm just changing the color. So I could say border or border color, doesn't matter. So I could say something like 1 pixel, or let's say 5 pixel, 6 pixel, and then I will say dashed, and then I would say red. And if I do this, see what happens. I'm able to change the border color of an element via JavaScript, which is super powerful, and you can see that we have changed it. Now, as I said, this particular style that we apply from JavaScript has the highest priority of all the styles. So if I go and check out the styles in elements tab, not actually in the styles, so here you would see that when this style is applied via JavaScript, this ends up in this element style section, and this whole CSS style that is written here, this is now overridden by another style. So you can see the cross here. This means that this style was there, but it is not being applied. So that means some other style is being applied. What other? This one. If I remove this or kind of disable this, you will see that the original styles are now being applied with a single pixel border and DC DC DC. Is that clear to everyone? That means when you are changing this with JavaScript, that has the highest priority of the style, and that is going to be used whenever you do that. All right, everyone with me so far? Everyone now understand what is a DOM? So if I refresh now, you see that we have this original position, and when you say DOM, that means it starts from the document, and then they might have seen all the good things that we added to the cart, the cakes, and I don't know what the other things are, small pizza. They might be doing the same. The cakes are good. No, we saw only one aspect of how to access DOM so far. That aspect was by using something like document.body.children. Imagine that you have imagine that you have a lot of children here. Then you can navigate through all those children one by one, and you can also try to see which element we have to find. For instance, let's say we want to find this menu item. Okay, so when we want to find this menu item, how can I go there? Since all the elements are nested, I would do something like document.body.children here, and this is the main element. So this is this one, right? Inside the main, we have content and then menu. So how do I try to find that? I do further. First, I get main by 0 index, because when we see children, this is an HTML collection which has 0 index and has this main element. So we do something like const main equals to this, which is 0 index. So now we got the main element. Now inside main, we have further children. So we would do something like main.children. And when you check that, then we have two things. We have the heading and the content. The content is at index 1. So we do something like main.children index 1, which is now content. But this content has furthermore children, that is menu. So I would do children dot or children1.children. And here we got the menu, and the menu is at index 0. How do we know? If you open this at 0 index, we have div.menu. So I'm going to do main.children1.children and then 0. Now, the good thing is that this is really close to the DOM. What if I had to find this rotisserie chicken? If I had to find this one, I would have to go through all of this by doing children. That is really hard. All right. How do I make sure that I get to a particular element without having so much trouble? One of the things is that we can not only access by this DOM traversal, and this is called DOM traversal. So whenever you see a video
on YouTube like DOM traversal. This is exactly that DOM traversal. So you can traverse through the DOM by using children, or you could also use CSS properties using the DOM variables. For instance, if you have, if I give this blah chicken an ID, let's say blah, then I can quickly get this element via this ID. Now this ID is not for the CSS. This ID is for JavaScript because we want to get this into our JavaScript context, and we can simply do that by using document.getElement by ID. So here we give the exact ID called black, and once we do that, you can see that it returns with null. Why? Because I haven't refreshed it, my bad. Now if I do that, you can see that now we get the exact chicken with the ID. So this is one way of doing that. Similarly, you could get elements by class names. Let's say if I had to get this list group item, so I would do something like document dot get elements by class name, and here we can provide the class name. Once we do this, you see that we get 5 items back, which are these 5 items. So we get the list group item, we got ID that we use, we got class, and then we use those class names. For instance, similarly, if I wanted class or cart list item group items, I could simply do that as well by just replacing this here. Now notice that when we use class name and when we use ID, we just provide the name. We don't use a dot or hashtag or anything for that, because in CSS we do that. We do a dot for classes, and whenever we use an ID, we use the hashtag. But here the hashtag, not the hashtag, but the hash. And now if we wanted to use via CSS, then we would use our class names. We use get elements by class name, and here you can see that we get two elements. All right, so far so good. We can access them by document itself, we can access them by ID, we can access them by class. Now another way of doing this is that we can use CSS selectors to actually get some elements, and we use that by using document.query selector. And now this takes a CSS selector, which means that if I had to get all these elements with the cart list group item, I cannot just say cart list group item, because this means they are trying to find a tag, an HTML tag with that. If I use a div here, that would work because it would get the div as the first container. All right. But if I say span, this gets the span. If I get something else, then it would do that. If I say body, it gets the body element. But if I have to use a class, then I would have to use a CSS class, which is dot, or CSS selector notation, which is dot, and then cart list. And now if I do this, you can see that we get the item. But hey, what's happening here? It's only returning the first item. Why is that? And that is because the query selector is supposed to get only one element. So you can use that. For instance, if I had to use blah, I would do that just like this. So we are using the hashtag, or the hash blah. The hashtag word is used so much that I cannot say hash. So we have this blah here, and now you can see we get it exactly. But if we want to get more items, then we do something like document.query selector all. That all means that it will return all the objects that are matching this notation. So if I say div, it's gonna return all the divs in the document, starting from the top one. So you can see here we have the container main, heading, content, menu, list group, blah 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 blah. So it goes towards all the div. Similarly, if I, instead of the div, if I say dot this class, so it will return me both of the items. Similarly, if I use list group item here, which is for the menu itself, I could simply say document dot class, or sorry, query selector all, and here I could say something like, hey, get all the list item groups within the menu. So I'm saying menu, then space, which means first find the menu, and inside the menu then you find the list group items. And here if you hit enter, we get all the items, all the 5 items, as you can see here. So let's say these are 2 elements. So if we have document.query selector all, and then if you use this, then you get both of those items, right? So if you have to just access one of those items, you could either do something like 0, because they are a list of HTML items. So you can pick the 0 one, which will be the first one if you want that. All right. Sorry, it's not cart list group item, it should be this one. So we do something like this, and you get the first item. So that's the first way to do it. Second way is to do it, don't use this array syntax, that is the second way, and specify the CSS selector. So in CSS we have something called nth child or first child. So we can use first child, and you see that it just returns us first element here. All right. Similarly, you could do something like nth
child and then say 1, and it will return the first element. The only catch that we have is that whenever you use query selector all, it doesn't matter if you want to get one item or multiple items. This function will always result in having a node list. It will never result in having a single node. It will always have a node list. So even if it gets one item, it will have a node list because this is a query selector all. So you are saying, hey, this is the CSS class, get all the elements back. Now you know that it will only return one item, but the code does not, the computer does not. So the computer will always try to create a list, and it depends on your context. You could have one item in that list, but you could also have multiple items in that list. So that's how it works. Okay, so now that we know a bit about how this all works, let's talk about actually working with some things. Okay, so first thing first, what we need to do is we need to apply a click handler to all these elements. All right, and we basically do that when we have this whole code loaded. So here what we'll do is that we'll say window dot onload, and here we're going to provide a function here, and then we are going to call something from here. So let's create a function. We'll call it main, and this main function is going to be called when the window is loaded or when we have done the rendering. So here we could say console.log window loaded, and here we are also going to call the main function, and then here we can say console.log I am the main function. Let's refresh this. And now you see that first we get the window loaded message, which is this one, and then we get the message I am the main function. All right, let's first try to get all the elements that we have here in this list. We already know that they have the class list group item, but as I said, it's always a good idea to go with the hierarchy. So we can say content menu list group item. So here we can create inside this main, we can create a constant array of list group items, or we could call them menu items, equals document.query selector all, and here we are going to provide them the CSS class. So we have menu, so we got menu list group item. So we can say menu list group, and then here we can say list group item. And then we are going to console log this. So we say console.log menu items. And if I refresh now, you see that we get all of these elements, all the list groups. Okay. Similarly, we can get the other elements as well, which is the cart items. So we get the cart list and cart list group items, but I'm not going to go there so far. We just got these elements. How do we apply a click handler to this element? So we do that by using something from JavaScript, obviously, but for that, we are going to create another function just for the sake of code clarity. So we can say const bind handlers, and that means that we are binding event handlers. So bind event handlers would be nice. And then here, actually we get this menu items here because we only need them for binding the event handlers. So we are going to call from this main function, we are going to call this bind event handlers. All right. So now from this function, we get the menu items. And then what we want to do is we can say menu items dot, and then we say add event listener. Okay. And then when we do this, we need to provide first the method that we want to use, which is click. And then we will just put a console.log here, clicked. All right. We got this menu items, but the thing is that we cannot apply a function to all of the menu items. All right. What we can do is we can essentially loop over these menu items and then apply to each of the elements. So here, instead of doing menu items dot add event listener, we're gonna basically apply this to all of the items one by one. Then we have menu items dot for each. So we are looping over each element. So we get item, and then we do something like item dot add event listener. Let me show you it via debugging. So you see everything is working. We have no errors. It means we have everything correctly working. So I'm gonna kind of do this, shrink this down a bit, go to sources, open the main.js and show you how this works. So here. So if I refresh, when the window is loaded, it comes here, it shows that message, goes into the main function, console logs this one, goes to the bind event handlers, comes inside, tries to find all the menu items that we have here, gets the list of menu items that you can see here. If I mouse over, you can see all these items. And now once we have logged this, you can see that we are going menu items dot for each, which means that we are looping over all the items. All right. So for each item, you can see that we get one item, which is the first item, and we are binding an event listener, which means that whenever we click on this, this function will be called. All right. So now this is the first item. If I hit play, you will see that we come with the second item. Now this is the second item. This is the first. This is the second. So we got the second item. We apply the same thing on that. Then we got the third item, this one. Then we got the fourth item, this one. Then we got the fifth item, this one. And now that we have assigned them to all of them, let's see if this works. So if I click the third item, which is ande wala burger that we call in Pakistan, and it's called egg burger. When we click on this, you can see that it comes exactly inside this function, and it would show us console.log clicked. All right. Similarly, if I click on anything else, you will see that we get more numbers of the same click. So I can keep clicking on all of these and we see them working. All right. So that is pretty cool. We added a click handler to all these items that we have in the menu. Now, when we have all of this done, what do we want to do with these values? Well, whenever we click a particular item, we need to first get this element text and then this price, because that is what we add here in this particular view. So what we are going to do here is that we are going to essentially call a function, and then we are going to do something with that. So let's create a new function. Here we are going to say const on menu item click, and here we are going to do something with that. So instead of using this console.log click, what we are going to do is that by default, JavaScript provides us with the event, which is the click event. So we can call it click event, we can call it event, whatever, it doesn't matter. So instead of just console.log click, or actually just keep it that, then we are going to call on menu item click with this event, with this click event. Okay. And we can use this click event within this function and kind of console.log it. All right, now let's see what happens when I click this. So if I hit biryani, you see that it says click, then it also shares this event, this click event coming from exactly this line. And this is the event that we get from JavaScript. Now this is all part of the DOM. So now if I open this, you will see that it has a lot of properties: cancel, bubbles, button, blah, 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 a lot of things. The thing that we are interested in is the target on which this was clicked. All right, so you can see that when we see the target, it says item.text because I clicked somewhere around here, but we applied the event handler on group item, which is a parent of this text. So if I have a look at this, this is the item text, but this is the item that I'm interested in. So where can I find this thing? Because what I actually want out of this whole process is I need this text and this price. So when I get these two things, I can add these things to the cart. That is the whole idea. So when I click here, it should be added to the cart. So I want to access these two things. So in this whole situation, you can see there is another property that we have the event dot, and we have source element here as well. Let's see. So we applied this on the list group items. All right. Then we got it here in this one. All right, let's see. And then we have the path, the bubbles should be true. All right. So how do we get this element? So we either have, if I quickly go here and click, let's say here, we still get this text, which is, sorry, we get the source element. We get the target list group item. If I click here again, now we should be getting the text itself, and we have a path as well, and we get this. Let me think about it. From what I'm trying to see is we only need to get this particular element, which is the list group item, and not something inside it. And we did used to have a property called current target, which is null here for some reason. And that is kind of mind boggling to me. Let's refresh. Chicken pasta. We see click event. And now we got current target. That is interesting. On the console log, it doesn't show it, but here in the code, it shows it. That is what I was looking for, and I got confused a bit. So when we click on something, actually, I'm going to try that again. So I know that I'm not mistaken. So let's click on this text, then check the click event, and then we have the current target. That's absolutely amazing. And then we have a target. Now the difference between target and current target is that when we click on a particular element in JavaScript, and this is a concept that you should know, this is part of the interviews most of the times, and people ask you, hey, what is event bubbling? And you probably don't know about that. So what happens is that if I click on an element that is nested inside here, let's say on this price element, then not only will this click event be applied to this price, but it will go all the way up top to body. That is called event bubbling because it initiates from an element which is too nested in the HTML world or structure, but it goes all the way up top, and that is called event bubbling. How do we know? Let's try it out. Let's say I have this click handler applied here, but then I also apply a click handler to, let's say, container. All right, so if I try to bind a handler to here by document.query selector, which is one element, and I say body, or actually I could say document.body, doesn't matter, .add event listener, click, and then I can say something like console.log I am document. So let's save this and see what happens when I click and refresh this. So if I refresh now, first of all, if I click here, you see this console log? I clicked this element and it says I am document. Why? So that is event bubbling. If I click this here, it says I am document. If I click outside, it says I'm document. If I click this cart text, it says I'm document. It doesn't matter wherever I click. It will be having that effect because the event bubbles up top. I could do the same thing with menu actually. So if I had to use this menu class, instead of document.body, I could say query selector, and here I could say something like menu. And if I now try to click outside, you see that it doesn't work because it's a different hierarchy. It's not document, it's just a menu. But if I click anywhere inside this menu, you will see that it is being clicked. All right. Let's say we don't want to work with menu, but just the container. Let's say if we talk about content, instead of menu, let's say content. So if I refresh now, you'll see this doesn't work. But if I even click on this heading, you see it says I'm a document, which is essentially looking at the content level. Similarly, if I hit this card, it says I'm document because it also comes inside this content element. So this content element contains both the menu and the cart. So even if I click inside this cart, the event is being triggered here because events bubble up top. Doesn't matter where you are clicking inside, it goes from element to element. So first, let's say if you click this div, then the first time it would be triggered here, then it will bubble up to here, that click event, then it will bubble up and will be triggered for this div, then it will go up to menu, then to content, then to this container, then to body, and then to document. So that is the whole hierarchy, and that is how JavaScript works. That is how the DOM works. So now you know why we have this event bubbling and what does it do. So anyways, the point of explaining this was when we see this click. So when we see this element and when we have a click handler here, when we click here, you will see that there are two things. Let's click again. Here we have one thing, which is the target. This target always shows exactly which element was clicked. Now we are not concerned about where do you click because it could be a nested hierarchy. What we are concerned about where we bound the function, and that is what is important for us. We actually bound the function to this list group item element, and you can see that in the current target. So this current target is something that you are supposed to look for. Okay, so I hope this makes sense. So how do we get out the current element? We just do something like const list item equals, we know that this click event has a current target, and that current target is exactly the list item. So here, if I do a console log here, you see that the click event dot current target is exactly list item. So if I go forward, this list item is exactly the list item. You see above, there above, it highlights it. All right. So this is the list item. If I get the list item, then I can get the text inside that really easily. How? Because then I can use query selector. Now, the second amazing part is that the query selector doesn't only work in document. So we have query selector here, and we are doing a document.query selector, but we could also do something like this list item dot query selector, which means that now it's only going to find within this list item. So if you want to find a particular thing within a div or within another item, you use query selector within that item. So here I can find where is my text, where is my price. So here you know that this list item group has this list item text or item text class. So we can do something like dot item text, and you exactly get the text.
Once you get the text, you can do something like dot text content. I already showed you that, and you get the exact text of this element. Pretty cool, right? So that's what we are going to do in the code. Here we're going to say const item text equals list item dot query selector, not query selector all, but query selector. And here we use the value dot item text because we are getting that by class, and that is only going to find it within that text. And then we are going to console log it, and then we'll see where we go from there. So baby steps, right? We don't want to jump too far. So now that we have this, we play, we refresh. I'm gonna remove the breakpoints, and here if I play now, you will see that if I click this, we get clicked, we get this element with chicken pasta, and we are gonna call it item text element, not item text, because that was confusing. And once we want to get the item title, we can say const item title equals item text element dot text content, and then we are going to actually log that. So now if I click here, you can see we get chicken pasta. All right. Similarly, I'm going to remove the other logs because I don't think we need them anymore. This one, not this one, not this one. Refresh. If I click here, we still have a log. Where do we have this log? So if I click here, you see chicken pasta. If I click here, you see biryani. If I click here, you see dal chawal. So now whatever item we click, we get the text of that element, and we get it right here. I'm going to remove all these breakpoints. I'm going to just click here, and then you'll see that if I click dal chawal, we first get the list item using the current target. So the current target is this list item. Then we try to find the text element, and we find it. You can see that the text element is right now highlighted, and then inside we get the text content, which is dal chawal. So this is amazing because this is programming, right? We are being smart about how we find a particular text using programming. Similarly, if I click this ande wala burger, we first get the click event, then we get the target, which is this one. Then we get the item text element, which is this one. And then we get the text content, which is exactly the ande wala burger. Okay. Moving forward, we could similarly say const price equals or first price element, and then we do list item dot query selector, and then here we give the class of the price itself. So we have item price here, then we use that and use a dot notation for item price. Then we say const price value, and here we can do something like price element dot text content. All right, and then this one we have that, and then we console dot log the price value. So if I now refresh, you will see that chicken pasta 200, we got two values. Biryani, its price. Ande wala burger, got the price. Dal chawal, got the price. So we got the last item and the price itself. Now we know what values we have here. We got the price value and the item title as well. The next step is to create these elements, right? In order to do so, they only depend on the price text for this. So we're gonna say create cart item. This is gonna be a function, and this function is going to essentially take a cart item. Actually, what I think right now is we could actually create a class for the cart. So we're gonna create a class for cart item, and here we're gonna essentially have this item to be created. So let's say we have this item, and then it has a constructor, and then what we have here is, let's say we have something called, this is basically dependent on two things, the title and the price. So we're going to create two properties here. We're going to say title price, and here we're going to say this dot title equals title, this dot price equals price. So we're getting the value from these. Just for the sake of simplicity, I could change the variable names here, so you know what we are talking about. This is title value, this is price value. Okay, this should be a capital V. So we got price value here, and now we have this cart item, and whenever we want to create a new cart item, we can just do a new cart item, and that should be good. Now this function should have in HTML, because this is what we have to put here, right? So here what we need to do is we could have something like a render method, and this would start looking like JSX or React, but it's simply what we are doing right now in plain JavaScript. So we are going to return a string. So we are using backticks, so we can do something like this. Otherwise, if we use quotations, this is not possible. So we are using backticks for a string. And here we can now simply say return, and then we are going to copy the template of this cart item primary, and then we are going to just paste it here in our code, not primary, but actually cart list group item, and that has actions as well. So here we are in the JavaScript, we are going to paste this. Now you might think that this is too much for you. What if we
we cannot import that. So yeah, let's keep it as it is for now. We have this string of HTML, and this is exactly a string that we are working with. Now we are supposed to replace the values of this chicken pasta here with something called this.title. So instead of using the hard-coded value chicken pasta, we can use string interpolation, which is $, and inside there we can say this.title. Similarly, for the price, we could do this.price, and this means that when we will try to call this render method for each cart item, we will essentially have this whole string returned, and then we can use it, right? Similarly, we could have something like a class for a cart itself. Now this cart item or this cart can have multiple items, so there would be an array of items. Now we have this cart which could have items. This cart might have a total. This card might have a function that calls calculate total. All right, and I think that's it. There could be another thing that would be something like, we could have another function that calls add item to cart, and then we would have these items could be something like an empty array. Then we could have something like remove item from cart, exactly something like this. Okay, so let's talk about what happens when we add an item or we click an item. We need to essentially have this cart item created. I'm gonna actually remove this not to make it too confusing. So we have this cart item, right? Let's say that we call this cart item, create it, get this HTML, and then do something with it. So what we would do is that we will first create, whenever we have this on menu item click, we will get the price and title, just like here. As you can see, when we click here, we get the title and the price, and then here we would do something like this. We would say, hey, we need a new cart item, so we can say cons item or cart item equals new cart item. And once we do this, we will just have to pass the item title and the item price here. The item title and the item title and the price value. Why don't we have this item price? So we can say item price, and here we can kind of pass it. Once we do this, let's see what happens if we console.log cart item. So if I refresh now, click one of those, you can see that when we have this element, we see these logs first, but then we are creating a cart item, which is this one. If I open this now, you can see that it has a price, it has a title, but it also has a render method here. All right. So if I do cart item.render here, what should I see? I should be able to see the whole string. So if I click here, you can see that we have this whole HTML, which has the chicken pasta and ₹200 present here. If I wanted to call this rotisserie chicken, then I would have that here and this here. Now this is the power of JavaScript. We can quickly program this to look something like this. Now we already have this string. How do we add that to this cart? That is the idea, or that is the question. Now you already saw some of the DOM tools or DOM functions that we talked about. The thing that we can do here is that we can take this render into a string. So we can have another variable called cart item string or cart item HTML and do this. And then when it kind of returns us the string, then we can essentially add that element into this cart. And now that we have this, all we need to do is add this new cart item, which is a cart list group item, to this cart list element. And that is what we want, right? So we're gonna first get this cart list. So we're gonna say here, hey, cons cart list equals document dot query selector, because it's one element. And then we're gonna say cart list. If we console log this, now you will see that we get this cart list, and this element is where we need to add one more item, one more cart list group, right? And this is the HTML that we want to add to this. Now this element, actually, if I store it as a global option as temp1, you see that this is the cart list. So I can actually do something like temp1 dot append, and this append essentially requires a tag. All right, that's one thing. Another thing is that I create another element and kind of add that to this particular element as well. So I could create another div and do that. One of the things that I would want to do is we have this whole string here. All right, instead of just returning this group item as well, I'm going to remove this actually, and I'm going to just return the inner text, which is this one. And that list group item, I'm going to create it via code right here. So I'm going to say
cons new cart item equals to, then I'm going to create a document dot create element. So I'm creating a div just like this. Then I'm going to give this div a class. So I'm going to say new cart item dot class list dot add, and here we're going to use this cart list group item class. And then finally we're going to say new cart item dot inner HTML equals this particular HTML that we have. Once we do this, then we should be having the cart list dot append, and then we can append this new cart item in the list. So here, if I go and start clicking here, you will see that once I click biryani, it comes here, it creates a new cart item, which has the price in the title. Then it gets the HTML, which is this one, this whole HTML, which is the inner content. Then it goes forward and gets the cart list, which is this cart list. Then it creates a new cart item by creating a div. So we are creating a div element within the JavaScript context. It's not in the view right now. It's not in the HTML. It's just in JavaScript. So this new cart item is essentially a div. It doesn't exist in the view. Then we take this div and then we add a class to it. If you look at the property class list here, which is class name here, you see that it doesn't have any classes. Now we do new cart item dot class list, which doesn't have anything, dot add this cart list group item. So we are trying to create an element similar to this one, and then we add this class to it. So now you see that this has a class. If I look at the div itself, in the class name, we should have this new class that you see here. Now the only thing is that this whole element is still in memory in JavaScript. It doesn't exist on the UI. So what we do is that we say first, this new cart item, which is a div, this should get all these things inside itself. So we are creating this particular element from JavaScript, but all of this from here in this place. Once we get that, we put all of this inside this element, this new element that we are creating, just like this. And you will now see that this new cart item, now if I look at the children, you see that it has children, it has the cart item primary, which has the text, and then we have the actions as well. And now all we need is to append this to cart list. So we are adding this to the cart list. If I move forward, boom, we got the biryani here. Yay! So that is what we were trying to do. So if I just do this, close this, and show you, if we click chicken pasta, we get chicken pasta. If we click roti sari chicken, we get that. If we click dal chawal, we get that. If we add more things, you can see that this works with all of those. How cool is that? So we need an identifier of some sort that we can use for these whole elements, right? So how can we identify it? So we could use something called data dash, and then let's say we have ID, all right? And then when we do this, let's say this has an ID of 1. When we refresh, we should be able to see this element here, and this particular element has this data ID 1. So let's say if this is the ID, and we can be a bit better than 1. Let's say we have 100. 100 is better than 1. So we have the ID 100 here. Then we got 101 here. Then we got 102 here. We got 103 here, and then so on and so forth. So let's say we have all those elements here. I'm going to try to keep at least one of these. So I'm going to remove one of these elements. Just keep one of these. So we have chicken pasta at the moment. And now if you see this one, what I need to do actually, instead of max width, it should be min width 50%. So I'm going to change that into cart CSS, where we have max width, because it was looking weird. Now it's better. All right. So let's say if we have this element here, the chicken pasta is the first one. So that has the ID of, that has the data ID of 101. All right. Sorry, 100. Now that we have the identifier, we can essentially check if an item is already present in the cart. We essentially first get this menu item data from this menu item itself. Then we extract that from there. Then we use that data to create a new cart. So for instance, you would see in the main.js here, we first get the click event, then we get the click current target. The current target is essentially this list item. Then we first try to get this text via the item text element. Then we try to get this price via this price element. Then we create a new cart item. Then we take that HTML and then we add that HTML to this cart. Directly adding this to the cart
we could check if this element exists or not. So here what we want to do is, when we do on menu click, we have a lot of things going on here. I'm going to remove the console logs here. So now you can see we are adding the chicken pasta again, although we have the same item existing inside the cart. Here, when we start creating a new cart, we can actually identify if we have the current element existing in the cart or not. And by that, we mean that if I look at this element, we can quickly do it right here. We click here, we store it as a global variable, which is temp1. So if I say temp1 here, we get this element. Now, how can I check this data ID attribute? So here I can check temp1 dot data set, and this has this ID property that we can check as an identifier. So here I could say something like ID, and you get this 100 value there. Let's check if this element is already existing in the cart or not. So let's say when we get this new item and price, we also need to get the ID. So let's say we say item ID equals, and then we say list item dot dataset dot ID. By that, we get the item ID, and then we can check if this item exists or not. So if, let's say for now we say true equals to true. So in any case, we are doing this. So let's say if we refresh this, we kind of put a breakpoint here, refresh, click, you see that we get list item, which is this list item dot dataset dot ID. So we get this 100 value here, right? Now the question is, how do we check if this same element exists inside the cart or not? So for that, what we can do is that we can try to find document dot query selector, and then we basically say, so we have this cart class. So in the HTML, we have this cart, inside we have cart list, inside we have this cart list group item ID. So here we can try to find something like, we say dot cart list, then we say dot, then we have list group item. But then also we want to not only find any element, but just the one with that ID. So we do that by using a brackets, and here we say data ID equals, and then we provide the value. If we say 100, doing it right, or is it this one? Yeah, it's that one. So we need to provide quotations as well. So if I say 100, then it tries to find it. If I say 101, it says null. So that's the difference. So if I use this ID correctly, then I should be able to find this element. And that's how we know that that element already exists. So I'm going to copy this whole code, go into JavaScript, and here, just before this or if condition, we're going to say const, or we can actually create a function of this. So we can say const does, or we could say item exists in cart already. So here we can check, we can say const existing element equals this. So when we do this, you will see that one of the things that we have to change is this ID. So how do we change that? We use the tick marks here. So first we take the tick mark, then we pass the item ID here. So we are going to go here, and then we are going to say item const exists existing item, and we can say item exists already in cart with the item ID. So what we're doing here is that we are using this item ID that we got from here, then we are passing that into this function, and this function is supposed to return us two things. First, a boolean that says exists, true or false. Second, the existing item that could be null or could be an element. So here I'm going to actually rename this to existing item, and then we are going to return two things. First, exists, and here we can say something like, or actually let's just use existing item. I don't think we need to return anything else. So item exists already in cart. We first say existing item. So we are using a boolean here, or you could do something like boolean. It doesn't matter. You could use the short form here, and then, or you could also say something like not equals to null. And the second thing would be existing item itself. All right. So here we essentially check if the exists is true by just doing this. So if it exists, then we are going to do something else. Otherwise, or we could say not exists. So if it doesn't exist, we create a new item. If it exists, we do something else. So we do something like console.log update the quantity. Now let's check if this works. So here, if I refresh now, you will see that if I click biryani, this will actually go here. I'm gonna put it here, refresh, biryani. It comes here, it gets the ID. So the ID is 101. Then it is passing that ID into item exists already in cart. So there it goes inside, and then it goes inside the function. And now it's trying to do document.query selector all, and it's 100 already. We haven't changed the code. So here, so instead of 100, we are supposed to use the item ID. All right. So here, if I refresh now, click biryani, this goes here, goes inside the function. And now what we have here is that we have the item ID set to 101. And then here, if I try to find this, it will return null, which means that exists will be false and existing item will be null. So from return, we get this variable, and you see that the exists is a false. So since it's false, then a new item will be created. So the whole process that we had before, it's gonna work as it is. But if I click biryani again, now this will get the ID, which is 101. It will go inside the function, go forward, and then here the existing item, why is it null? Because the new item that we created, it doesn't contain that property. So one of the things that we need to do is we need to, whenever we create a new item, just after the inner HTML, we also need to do new cart item dot data set dot ID equals to this item ID. So whatever we have here, that's why it didn't work. Let's try it again. We had biryani one time, it adds that. We had biryani again. Now it goes inside, tries to find that, finds it. So now it finds it because it already is added to this cart. And check the existing item, we already got it. All right. So when we go outside from this, this exists would now be true, which means that this will not be false and will now come into the second function and say, hey, update the quantity. Do not change the existing one, or do not add a new one, but just update the quantity. So here now all we need to do is write the code for updating the quantity. And you know that this quantity is inside this value, which is here. I'm gonna remove this. So this quantity right now is inside the actions div, inside which we have a quantity variable. So it exists here. So all we need to do is increment this value by 1. So when we get this value and we already have the existing item, what we can do is that we can see here the existing item. So we can do something like const quantity, and here we can say existing item, which we already have. So we have this existing item right here as the cart list group item. This is what we have. So when we have this existing item, we can query selector all. We can use the query selector all to get this quantity just like this. So we can say existing item dot query selector, not all, but query selector. And then here we are going to find something like actions quantity. Once we do that, we get the quantity element. All right. So let's try this and see if we find it. So I'm going to add chicken pasta again. I'm going to enable the sources. So if I hit chicken pasta, we get here, we go forward, and then it comes here and we have existing item, which is the list group item. And then we try to query selector with quantity. So if we go forward, you see that the quantity element, why didn't it stop? Let's console log it. Quantity element, refresh, chicken pasta, click here, go forward. And then here, if I go forward, we have the quantity element. So we exactly reached the quantity variable. All right. So now that we get the quantity element, we need to extract out its value. So if I do something like, so if I do here quantity element dot text content, you see that we get a value back. Now you know that we cannot increase it by just adding things to it. If I do something like text content plus 1, we got quantity element text content plus 1 that says 11. That's stupid. But we need to first convert this into a number. So what we'll do here is that first we'll get a quantity value, which is quantity element dot text content. But then we also need to convert this into a number. So we'll say parse int, or not actually parse int, but parse float. And then here we have this value. The property or the price could be in floating point. So when we have that, we have the quantity value here. and then we can use that to increase it. All right. So once we get this value, let's say chicken pasta, then it moves forward. I'm gonna just go right to the point where we have quantity element, then we have quantity value. So quantity value now becomes 1, which is a number, as you can see. So now that we have quantity value, we can just increase that and update into this quantity element. So here we can say quantity element dot text content equals, then we can say something like quantity value plus 1. Once we do that, let's see what happens. So once I click chicken pasta, it comes inside, goes forward, gets the quantity value, and then assigns the value of the text content, which is right now 1, to quantity value plus 1. And you can see that the value here is 1, but if I go forward, now it's 2. Boom. So if we keep adding the same elements now, you see that the value keeps increasing. And if we have a new item, then it works. So we got this one. All right, so we'll begin with working with the JS DOM manipulation. And here, let's talk about first adding those icons. So for the icons, we're going to use something called Font Awesome. Search Font Awesome CDN. So we got Font Awesome here. We got the 6.0.0 beta, but we actually want something that is 5 point something. So anything before 5 point something. Yeah. So we got this one. And let's see. So we got font awesome.min.css. I think this is the one that we want. So we're going to be copying this one and we're going to go ahead and include this into our HTML. So we're going to go ahead in the code, and here in the code, just around the style CSS, we're going to include another link tag, and we're going to have a link tag that is of CSS. And then we'll, in the href, we are going to paste this whole link. All right. So once we do this, Font Awesome should be available for our page, and we should be able to use Font Awesome code. So if we go back to Font Awesome, which is this side, we can actually start looking at the icons themselves. So if you go and click icons up top, you should be able to see all these icons. Okay. And when you see those icons, you should be also able to just use any of those. So it's really easy to work with Font Awesome if you have not done it already. So how do you do that? You just say plus, let's say, and then you get this icon, and then you click on this or control click or whatever, and you can see what is the word behind this, and it's plus. Here you can click start using this icon, and here you get the code for this one. So you just copy this code, and then we're going to go into our HTML. And in the HTML, so here we have certain HTML elements, but the ones that we are interested in is this one. In this cart menu, what we have here is essentially this minus icon, and here instead of this this plus icon, and here we can use this plus icon instead. So we got this FA plus blah blah blah. So we're going to use this, and let's see if this reflects in our UI. So here it does not reflect in our UI, which means that we have done something terribly wrong. So we have used actually font awesome.min, but maybe we should be using this one. Let's try it out. Let's try the all min.css. So here we have this CSS. Let's refresh. And yes, there we go. We got the plus icon right here. So it looks like the font awesome CSS only includes the fonts, but maybe leaves out some information there. So we got the plus icon here. Let's see what we have for minus. So here, if we go back here, let's try finding minus. And here we got minus, and we can see the sort of icon name here. So we have minus or minus square, or you could use either of those, right? So let's say we use this minus one, which means that we're gonna be creating the same code as plus, just the FA plus would be changed to FA minus. So here, let's create an I tag that has a class FAS and also has a class FAS minus. If I refresh, everything is gone. Because why? Because this is not FAS, this should be FA. Refresh, there we go. We got the minus and the plus. If I refresh, you can see by default we get this particular element here. But what's actually interesting is that if I add another item here, let's say this one, this doesn't get those. And the reason is that this particular HTML is hard coded for only one element. Okay, the actual code when we add an item doesn't come from here. So I'm gonna remove this hard coded item right from here. So let's remove this. Now the cart list is empty by default. All right, and I'm just following from where we left last time. So by default the cart is empty, we don't have anything. But if I add this item, you can see that it starts adding those items, right? One of the issues that I have is this cart is actually it's okayish, but what I don't like about this one is it kind of expands and contracts, and it has this sort of weird behavior where it is changing its width. So we don't want that. So let's try to make sure that we have a fixed width for this cart. So here in this cart, we have the cart list, and we have this cart class here, or cart element. Here we have this cart min width set to 50%. But what I would like to do is I would like to fix this width, and let's say take the rest of the items, take the full width. So, or at least let's say minimum 50% is okay. So in this particular case, what I would like to do is we have display flex already. We want to give this menu the whole width, but we just want to have this one here, let's say have a particular fixed width. So right now the width of this element is, if I see this, this is 254 pixels into 266, so 254 pixels in general. So what I would do here is that I'm gonna go to my style.css, and here I'm gonna say that this content dot cart is actually not cart, but cart is actually of width. It was what exactly? 254 pixels. Let's say 250 pixels, for instance. So here we're gonna give this 250 pixels. So if I refresh now, you see that we got 250 pixels. Here, if I now add items or remove items, it doesn't matter exactly, because you can see the items are exactly the same. So by default we see this, but then we add items and it looks exactly the same. So we are good there. We don't have any worries here. Now that we have this information here, we could want that this item or this whole div takes, let's say, the maximum width possible. If we want this menu to take up the whole width of this entire element, we could give this something called a flex 1, and then it would take the maximum space available. All right, so we don't need that at the moment, so we are just gonna, with this we are going to make it responsive later on, but that's not the point of this video. We're going to be mostly looking into the functionality here. So now that we have this information, what we talked about was replacing these two icons. So in the HTML where we had those icons as FA minus and FA plus, I'm going to copy these. The cart list right now is empty. I'm going to go into my JavaScript file, and in my JavaScript where we have this template inside this render method of the class cart item, here we also have these plus and minus. So I'm going to replace this plus and minus by this code. So here goes FA as FA minus, and here instead of this plus character we got FA plus. Now since this is inside the class items render method where we have the whole string, what happens is that now if we try to add any item, the icon goes with that. So if I add more items, you can see that more items get this information. All right, one more thing that I would like to do is actually to reduce this whole element's height and kind of fix it. So if I have more items, I can just scroll through it. So let's say if we want to have the height of this whole div set to something like, let's see what we can do with here. Let's say we get this a max height of 400 pixel. Then it becomes something like this, as you can see. But the content inside this is actually flowing. So I'm not going to give a class to this, but I'm going to give a class to this cart list. So here I'm going to give this, let's say 360 pixel. All right, which kind of sums up like this. I'm going to remove the class from here. All right, so this doesn't have any maximum height, but this does. And then I'm going to give this an overflow Y. Now what this does is that this will make sure that if the content is within this height, which is 360 pixel, then it will not show any scroll. But if it's more than that, then it will show a scroll. All right. One of the things that we could do in order to make this a bit better, to not have this gap and then have this sort of scroll being shown here somewhere, is that instead of having this padding that we have on the cart level, we might want to have the padding inside here. So what I'm going to do is that first I'm going to do what we did here. So I'm going to copy this maximum height and overflow Y. Let's copy this, go to our CSS, and for the class of cart, actually not cart, but cart list. So we're going to say content dot cart dash list. And here we're going to give these two styles, which are maximum height and overflow. Now if I refresh this and add some items, you will see that we get this scroll. So we get this scroll, we are good here. Now what I talked about is we need to remove this gap from here and kind of move this scroll bar to this end. The reason we have this scroll kind of having this gap is because the outer container of this list, so this is the list, you can see where it renders, right? So instead of having this rendering here, if it rendered the full width, then this scroll would be at the full width itself. But since it's here, it's taking this spacing from this card, because you see this green background. The green background is the padding from this cart element. So the cart element has some space inside it. All right, then comes the cart list. Cart list doesn't have any spacing logic, it just is there. But the outer cart element is pushing the inner element inside with this padding. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to remove this padding. You can see that it goes to the corners, and instead of this padding from here, I'm gonna add some margin, or sorry, some padding inside this cart list. So I'm gonna actually remove this padding from this place to this cart list. All right, and you see that now we got some inner gaps similar to before, but now the scroll bar is at the very corner, and this looks much better in my personal opinion. So we should be doing this and not that what we were doing. All right, so far so good. We need to remove this padding from there to there, so let's do that. So we're gonna remove the padding from cart and move to cart list. Let's do that in the code as well. So in the code we have the padding here, so we're gonna remove this from the cart, but we are gonna move this into the cart list here. And since we already have a cart class, I'm gonna remove this width from here and then move it inside here. So we have all the things, all the styles for a cart at one place. And I'm also going to just remove this code from here and bring it here just for alignment, so to say. So we got cart list, we're good. Now that we have this information here, let's try this out and see if it actually works. So I add items, you see the gap here, and you also see the scroll. So we got the scroll as well, and we got the gap as well. But we also got an issue, and the issue is that now this element doesn't have any spacing from left or right, and that is because previously this cart had that padding. We removed that. Since we removed that, this H4 takes the full space. Now how do we give this element also some gap? By doing the same thing as cart itself. So here we have this padding of 20 pixel from left and right. We can do the same thing here on cart, and here we can say something like padding 0 20 pixel, and you can see that it kind of becomes the same with this cart now. All right, so I hope this makes sense. All right, now that we have this thing here, actually what I'm thinking is kind of making this similar to this guy. You see that here the title is above this list, and here the title is inside. So I'm not pretty sure about that. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna remove these borders from this guy to move it to cart list instead. Let's do this. So I'm gonna go to style and remove this border and border radius from cart and move this to the cart list. And now they both kind of look the same. So if I now open, it kind of looks similar now. Now you see it looks much alike. We have the title and then we have some code here. All right, so this is okay, this is cool. What we could also do is we could have another element instead of cart list, and we could give that the class as well. And the reason I'm saying that is that we want to have a total here as well at the bottom, which we don't have right now. So we're gonna add that, and we're gonna do some structural changes. So first, let's say we have a cart inner element inside which we would have this cart list, and inside which we would have cart total. So we got two elements here. Now I'm gonna move the styles. So if I refresh now, you will see that if I add some items here, this looks okay, we are good. The only problem that I see is that when I refresh, this doesn't have anything. And this is a problem because this should be at least having some height. So in order to have that, I'm gonna add the height here. So we are gonna say something like minimum height, or actually not minimum height, but just height set to, let's say, 360 pixel. So we got this one here, and we're gonna move this to the cart inner styles. So here I'm gonna go and say something like content cart inner. And this guy should be of height, not 260, but 360. All right. And this cart inner should also have these borders. So I'm gonna put that. Let's refresh. You see that we have an outer border and then an inner border. So the inner border right now is for this cart list. So I'm gonna remove the inner border from here. Then I'm gonna refresh. And now you see we don't have anything, but if I add something, it comes here. So this is good stuff. Now I want to have a total. So here in the cart total, I would have some sort of text like total is 100 or 1000. So if I refresh now, you will see that we have this div that says total is blah blah blah. And if I add item, the total goes down and it kind of goes all the way here, which is not really ideal. So what I want to do is that in this cart inner itself, I want to have something, and that something is essentially this guy. So we would have this cart inner being display flex, and the flex direction would be column. Let's try this out. Then I'm gonna add some things, and now you see this element, this stays here. It doesn't go away. Do you see what's happening here? So we got this element right here. This particular scroll, this is on the cart list, as you can see. This total always stays at its position. It doesn't move, and this is what we want. Then this cart inner is the entire element which has this sort of padding within it, right? One of the things that we would like to have is that this cart list, this shouldn't have the padding, but we should move this padding actually to this cart inner. So I could move it here, and this is then how this would look. So padding this. For the cart list, we cannot have a padding from left and right, but we got to have a padding here in this particular moment. So we're gonna do that. Let me do that. So the cart total should also have, so we have a padding on cart list. We also need a padding on cart total. So we are gonna say something like padding, and then do this. And you see that now we have this total here as well. Probably not give this a bottom 20 pixel, maybe 10 pixel. That is fine for us. For top as well, I'm gonna give this a 10 pixel, so we can quickly and easily say something like 10 pixel, 20 pixel. This is okay for me. I would like to have the text aligned for now to right, having something like this. So this is how it would look. Ideally, total is blah blah blah. And now that we have both of these styles, we can add that to the cart total class. We're gonna go into the code, and here we're gonna say something like content dot cart and then dot cart total, and here we have those styles. So let's refresh. We got this guy here, and we have the other element as well, which is here. The only thing that we are not doing is that we need to add this property flex1 to this cart list. So let's do that real quick. So we're gonna go to cart list and add flex1. So now whenever we refresh, you can see that this place is empty because we have flex1. That's why we have this whole div taking the whole space. This guy takes the whole space. This one has only the bottom place here, so we are using that. So we keep adding items. We see that the items are actually in a good user interface manner that we see here. We can remove some items. We cannot remove some items because that's what we have not implemented so far. We got an HTML that contains a place where we could have a total. So that's that. And we are able to add some items. So let's say if I add chicken pasta, we get 200 here. We get a plus minus button. We click again on chicken pasta. We increase the number by 2. We add another item. So we add that. If I double click on this one again, the items becomes 3. That's what we have so far. But now we also want to do multiple things. For instance, we want to be able to click this plus button and do something else. But even before that, I think what we need to figure out is whatever count we have here, this number should actually represent the same sort of value, which is per item amount into the count that we have here. And that's what we are not doing at the moment. So let's try to do that. Right now in the code, if I go and check cart item render function, what you will see here is that we have this item where we show the title, which is actually this guy here, the title. Then we have this currency, which is rupees here. So here it says rupees. We have this price here, which is this guy. The thing is that what we want to do is we want to be able to increase the price for this particular element that we have. And the thing is that right now there's no way. When we update a particular value, we just update the number, the quantity of it. So if I look at the code, which is right here in this line, whenever we click on a menu item, which is this one, whenever we click a menu item, it goes and checks, hey, is the item already in the list? If the item exists already, item already exists in the cart. And here I'm going to comment item does not exist in the cart. So in this particular case, you can see that when it doesn't exist, then we create a new cart item. But when it exists, we just update the quantity. Now, what are we doing here? We are essentially going and querying the exact element, then we update the quantity value. The thing is, would it be cool if we could just access the particular cart item and then do all the things from here, because that's what we have the class for. So this is now going to be a bit interesting because we are going to use some JavaScript logic here. So first thing first, we need to have an array of cart items here. So I'm going to do is I'm going to create a cart items array. Whenever we create a new item, what we'll do here is that we are going to add that item to the cart. So here, what I'll do is that I'll add that item, cart items dot push, and here I'm gonna add this new cart item that we did before. Now, the only thing that is remaining is what I want to do is, instead of when we create a new item, we also create this whole div. Instead of doing that, what I want to do is that I want to render the cart accordingly. So what would happen is that in this particular case, so we got the ID here and we add that item into the items as well. Now what I need to do is that whenever a cart is already present in this cart items, we want to get that particular cart item and then update its view. So the way we will do that is that first we are going to log that item or find that item in this array. So let's say whenever we are updating an item, we just log the cart items array. Let's try this out in the source code. So here in the source, what you would do is, let's see. And what I'm going to do is actually, I'm going to make sure that my screen or my video doesn't kind of hurt. All right. So now let's see. Now that we have the code only, let's say we first add an item to the cart. This is what happens when there's no item in the cart or the item does not exist in the cart. So when I click here, you will see that it comes in here in this particular chunk. So it says, hey, the item does not exist in the cart. When it does that, it creates a new cart item with the title and the price. It goes inside, all right? And then what happens is that this essentially takes the HTML and then it also creates this element. So it then kind of gets the list. Then it creates a div. Then it adds some classes to it. And then it appends that to the list. So you see that here. Just like this, right? Now what we are doing here is that we are also adding that item to the cart items. So in this particular scenario, if I go forward, so we click this, we come here, and then when we come at this point, we are able to see the cart item itself, which is this cart item that we just created with the title and the price. What we also should be doing is using this ID as well. So one of the things that this cart item should have is the ID itself. So what I'm going to do is that this cart item should have a title, should have a price, should have an ID, and should also have a quantity. All right. And this quantity reflects here when we have this value here. Okay. So when we have a cart item, that means that we should have a value for its quantity. We should have the value for its price, we should have a value for its title, and we should also have its ID. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to use the ID here, the price value, and the quantity as well. And by default, we are going to say the quantity is going to be 1. So if we don't provide the quantity, that's going to be 1 by default. So we are going to say this dot ID equals ID, this dot quantity equals quantity. So this variable, or we could say quantity value, let's say, and this quantity value is going to be assigned here, and this is ID value, just for the sake of your understanding. So we got ID value assigned to this dot ID, quantity value assigned to this quantity, and this is what we have. So whenever we go and whenever we click either of these items, what happens is that we get this menu item click basically called, and when this is called, then we create a new cart item with the item title, item price, but I want to also use the ID. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to pick the ID because we have the item ID right here. So I'm going to pass this item ID from here, and then I'm not going to pass any quantity from here, although I could say quantity 1, but I'm not going to pass this here. Okay. So now that we have this value here, what we're going to do is we're going to have this for the editing method as well. So now if I save this, go back here, click here, see what happens. So I'm gonna go to sources, and here I'm gonna have the breakpoint here. If I click here, see what happens. In this particular case, when we had this new item created, let me refresh, click here. So here we have the ID 100, for the chicken pasta, we have the title chicken pasta, we have the price here. Now when this goes inside this cart item, it goes inside the constructor, and in the constructor we get the ID value, the title, the price value, and the quantity value by default is set to 1. When this is set, what happens is that it generates a new instance of this cart item, and the cart item that we get is this: ID 100, price 200, quantity 1, and this is chicken pasta. All right, does that make sense? So I think we are pretty good on understanding what's happening here. But the thing is that if I want to show multiple values for price, for instance, whenever I click this plus, or if I click this again, then this becomes 2, but this doesn't change. The reason for this is that when we go in the edit mode, we directly go and we change this particular text. We should not be doing actually that. What we should do is we should be updating the exact element which the cart has. So first of all, we need to find, hey, which element has been updated. Let's say we got 2 more items here, this item and this item. Now if let's say I update this dal chawal, then what would happen is that if I click here, let's say if I try to increase the value of dal chawal by just clicking here once more, what would happen is that it would come here with the ID of this item, which is 103. It would pass item ID here, then it would go there and try to find the existing item using the query selector. Once this finds this item, it actually returns back the exact HTML that you can see is highlighted. So if I hover over it, you can see it's highlighting this item, the same item in the cart. Once this does that, then we are able to go ahead and then we use this existing item, which is this existing item, and then we update the value just like this. All right, instead of doing this, what we should be doing is we should have this cart items array populated with each cart item. Okay, each cart item has a method that is called render, so we should be re-rendering this item with the new values, and that is what we should be doing. So I'm going to do that by using by instead of hard coding this whole logic here, I'm gonna change how we check an item, and I'm gonna also change how we render the value. All right, to 2 steps and baby steps. First of all, I'm gonna change this whole code, or I'm going to comment this one out, so we don't have anything when we update the code. What we want to see is checking if the item exists in the cart already, and we already have an array of items where we add these cart items. So here you can see that in this cart items array, we already have the cart items, and each cart has this ID. So why don't we just check this array and check this cart item? So what I'm gonna do in this code here, when we check the items in cart, instead of checking the DOM or the view, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to say const existing item equals, then I'm going to check the cart items array, which is this one. So I'm going to say cart items dot find, because I'm trying to find an element inside an array, and you do that by using the find method, which takes a parameter or a function essentially, and this function gets each cart item one by one. So here it's gets cart item. So for each cart item, I want to return if the cart item dot ID equals the item ID. So whenever there comes a case where any of the cart items matches this item ID, that is my existing item. So let's try this actually in action. So here I'm going to refresh. I'm going to click this chicken pasta. This is going to do something. I'm going to add this biryani. Sorry, what did I do? Oh, this item. So existing item, blah, 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 exists should be false. For some reason, it returns true. Let's check. Let's debug. Refresh, click. It comes here, it goes here, and then it returns what exactly? Exists is true. How exactly is this true? So we go forward. We go with the item ID 100, we go inside, then we check if the cart item can be found. So here, the cart item should actually be, oh, we are checking if it's not equals to null. So we shouldn't be doing that. We should just say if the existing item exists. So here, I'm gonna just change this condition, and I think we should be good. So we refresh, we click, we come here, we go inside the function. So we don't go yet, but we will. Sorry, refresh, click. It will come here. It will go inside this function. It will try to find the existing item, which it will not, because the cart item ID is 100. There is no cart item so far, so array is 0. So I'm going to go forward. Existing item is undefined. It returns this back. Then we check, hey, is the item existing? No, because it is undefined. So we got false here. Then we create a new item. We create a new item. We add it. we add it to the cart items array as well, and we add it to the DOM as well. Now let's say I click another item, go with the same process, but now if I'm trying to add another chicken pasta, in that case we should have something different. So if I click here now, we got the item ID 100. We go inside, we see, hey, what are the cart items? Now the cart items are two. One is chicken pasta, second is biryani. The first one, chicken pasta, has the ID 100, and it also has the second item which has ID 101. So in this case, what happens is that it comes within the code and then tries it with the first item. So we are checking cart item 100. Is it the same as the item ID? And it exactly is, because both are chicken pasta. So when it finds it, the existing item is not undefined, not false, not null. It's actually the cart item. So what we do here is that we return this back, and now we got the existing item here. All right. Now we need to do something with that item. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to break this code that we have into multiple things. First thing first, we need to add the item into the cart. All right. So for that, I'm going to create a function. Here, I'm going to say const add item to cart. For this one, I'm going to just take this new cart that we have, which is this new, sorry, not this one, but actually this cart that we create here, the cart item. So when we get this cart item, we're going to pass this cart item to this function, and this function will do everything that we are doing here. So I'm going to just cut all of this from here and then paste it here, and then this cart item should be passed using the function. So I'm going to say add item to cart, and here I'm going to pass cart item. This is making our code absolutely beautiful because we are changing how it all works and how it all looks. So this function has the responsibility to use this cart item, generate the HTML, do all the stuff, push it to the array, and also show this into the UI. So if I refresh now, see what happens. I'm gonna put a breakpoint here. So at this point, I'm gonna add chicken pasta. It comes here, it says, hey, that doesn't exist in the array so far. So the exists is false. Therefore, it comes here. It generates this new cart item, and then once this is done generating this, then it passes the new cart item, which is this one, to this add item to cart function. It goes inside, then it first gets the HTML of this cart item using the render method. So we get all the HTML here with the price and all. Then we basically get the cart list. Then we create a new item, add some classes, assign the HTML, assign the ID as well, which is the item ID here. So it's going to break because we don't have the item ID. Instead of item ID, we are going to be using the new cart item not new cart item, but cart item.id. So here we're going to be using cart item.id. Let's try this again. Refresh. I'm going to remove this from here. Click this one, go forward, go forward, go forward, go forward. And in this particular case, when we got the cart item.id, which is 100, we assign this to the HTML to be created. Then we append this. And when we do, this ID that we just assigned to this HTML appears right here in the HTML, right here. So you should be able to see this now. Now that we have this done, we are pushing this to the cart items. That is cool. So we got this cart items here. Now what I want to do is that I want to do the same for edit. So here for the edit, I'm gonna create a function and I'm gonna call it edit item in cart. So I'm going to pass the cart item here, just like this. And then what would happen is that here, I need to find this cart item. But in order to have this item edited, I'm not going to pass the cart item, but rather I'm going to pass the item ID, this one. So I'm going to use the item ID here. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to say const, or I would actually say edit item in cart and pass the item ID. Now what should happen here is that, sorry, I should be getting the existing item here. So I'm going to use the cart item here as well. Cart item, cart item. So in this particular case, we get the cart item or the existing item. We could say cart item, or yeah, existing item is fine. So this existing item is the item in cart. So let's use that, and I'm going to just console log it for baby steps. So we got cart item. Let's see if this works. So if I refresh and if I just click here, let's add chicken pasta. It would go through all the process, get added. And if I hit chicken pasta again, it now goes here, moves forward, comes back from here because it would find it. Then we will get this in the existing item variable, just like this. So we got the chicken pasta, we found it here because it's here in the cart, and then it will go forward and go in edit item in cart as the cart item. So here it goes inside, and here you see the cart item being logged. So we got the cart item here. Now how do we update this? And this is going to be interesting because we would have to do the least amount of work in this case. Since we are editing an item in the cart, what we could do is we could either decrease the quantity, increase the quantity, or delete the item itself, right? Let's say when we click the menu item click, we want to edit the item, but we also want to pass something like what should we do with this item? Should we add it, delete it, or increase or decrease the quantity? So let's say we have a couple of actions. We can create a constant for this action. Let's say we say something like const cart item actions, and here we have a couple of constants. The first constant is increase quantity, and we can call this, let's say, increase. Second is decrease quantity, and we can call this decrease. Similarly, third one could be something like delete item, and we can call it, let's say, delete. We can also make this capital because it's a constant, so we can say something like cart item actions. And then when we are kind of passing this from here, we can also pass the action. So here in the edit item card, this action would be essentially either one of these. So from here, what we will do is that when we are calling add item in cart, we are going to pass this action as, we're going to say cart item actions dot, and then we will say increase quantity. So that means we are editing an existing item, but we are increasing its quantity. So it will go inside here. We already got the cart item. So what we'll do here is that we'll apply an if condition to be simple. So we are going to say if the action equals cart item actions dot increase quantity, then do what exactly? First, update the quantity in the cart. So we can simply say cart item dot quantity plus plus, which means the quantity of the cart item will increase. Then what we will do is we will essentially try to find its HTML just like this. So what would happen here is that we will do existing item dot query selector action. Here I am doing something wrong, and that is we need to get this existing item. So here, once we have got the quantity, then we will do something like this. So what we are doing here is that we are saying, hey, if the quantity is supposed to be increased, then increase the quantity. Then try to find the existing item in the DOM via cart item dot id. Once we got the existing item in the DOM, which is here, then what we need to do is that just replace its HTML with the render function. So all these magic that we want to do, it's gonna go away. How? We're gonna simply say existing item dot inner HTML equals cart item dot render. Let's see if this works. So I'm gonna go and refresh this. Now I'm gonna add chicken pasta. It will do all the magic that it does. Then if I'm clicking chicken pasta again, let's see what happens. So here it will go again, and it will go through all this logic here, which we don't want. Then it will go in the edit item cart. Inside here, it will get the cart item first. Then it will see, hey, what is the action? And the action is increase, which is exactly this. So they will be combined. The cart items quantity right now is 1, as you can see here. So the quantity would be increased to 2. And now you will see the cart items quantity is 2. And now we are saying, hey, get the existing item in the cart. This is the item. You see it highlighted. And now, since we have this item here, we are replacing its whole HTML with the render method. Once we do that, you will see that something would break or not, because we haven't changed the quantity. Wait, wrong. And that was exactly what? So we have add item to cart. We got this in our HTML, which is the list group item. All right, we need to get this list group item. We get that actually. Then inside the HTML, we update. All right, so if I refresh now, try this again. I'm gonna remove these from here, but just keep the one in edit. So if I click this one, let's see what happens. So the quantity should be here. All right, I know what's happening. We have not updated the render method. So here we need to do one more change to reflect the actual quantity and the price. Here you can see we have hard coded the price to always show this price value. But what we need to do here is that multiply this with the quantity. So we do this dot quantity. By default, when we add an item, see what happens. But if I edit this now and go here, see what happens. We get the result. All right. So this is the amazing part about this whole refactoring that we did, because this is amazing. Now, if I go and click this again, you can see that it goes here, change the quantity to 3, because right now it's 2. So it changes this quantity to 3, but then also it goes here, finds out the existing element, which is this. Then in the render method, when it goes here, it prints the title, but then for the quantity, this now prints price into quantity, which means 200 into whatever the value is, and then returns the value 600. You can see that we are not updating the quantity here. Let's do that as well, because that also is hard coded at the moment, which is here, the quantity. So here, let's also change that to do something like this dot quantity. So now if I refresh, let's see what happens. Go forward, existing item, go inside render. Now the title is chicken pasta, the price is 200. Now this is also an interesting thing to change, because this price should be a number. So we might have to do some changes here, but the quantity is 2 and the quantity shown here is 1 at the moment. So we need to change that to 2. So now if I go forward, you see the quantity changes and the price also changes. As I said, this price should be a number. So what we'll do is that we'll do something like parse float, and here we'll parse it as a floating point, and then we'll multiply it with the quantity. Now all the breakpoints removed. Let's see what happens. Chicken pasta biryani. Now if I click chicken pasta, you see 2 here, multiply by 400. Multiply by 200 equals 400. Then if we keep adding, the values keep multiplying. All right. So this is amazing. This is what we actually want. All right, so let's move forward. You can see that all the functionality that we needed to do, we can do it really easily in just a few lines of code where we just change the HTML. We don't have to go find a particular element. We don't have to do much logic here. We just need to find out the cart item first in the array. So we find it out in the cart items array. Then we try to find out its element, and then we just change the render. And that is what we want to do. Okay. Now, if I want to click on this plus, that is exactly the same thing, right? We are doing the exact same thing in case of plus. So how do we make sure that when we click plus, this quantity changes? So let's say const plus is a function that is called, and we say plus clicked. So let's say we're talking about this thing, right? So when we do a plus clicked, can we do it something like this? Can we say that, where was the on click? Where did I put the on click? Oh, here it is. It's on the price. Why do I have it on the price? We shouldn't be having that on the price. I'm going to cut this from here. Let's say we put it here in the right action. Okay. Not using these backticks. Just a small ticks here. Let's see if this works actually. So if I go to console, refresh, click here, click plus, this is what happens. So this is what React does, sort of, in a way as well. And this is what we can do. How do we get this particular cart item in that case? So this is what you could do. You could bind the function name. So we got the plus clicked here. Similarly, we could have a minus clicked here. That's one thing. So where we have this function which says bind even handlers, we're gonna go here and then we are going to first find the cart list element. So we are gonna say cart list element, and here we're gonna say document dot query selector, and here we're gonna use the class cart list. Once we get this, we're gonna add an event handler to this one. So we're gonna do something like this. I'm gonna do some copy pasta. And then once we have this list element, then we are gonna see what happens when we click a button. So let's say we have something like something, okay? So what this does is that now if I start clicking here, you see that something is being logged. But if I go outside and click outside, that would not be logged. So what event delegation means is that we have a concept of event bubbling, which means that if I click something inside the cart list, let's say if I add an item and start clicking on this pasta, which is a text element, which is this item title, if I start clicking here, even then I would see this something message being printed. Why? Because in JavaScript or in the DOM, whenever you click an element, whether it's a text or this item primary or this group item or this cart list, wherever you click, it will bubble up. It will go from here to here, here to here, here to here, and then it will eventually go up top to the document. That is called event bubbling. If an element is clicked, it goes all the way up document. Now the event delegation is opposite of this. Event delegation is delegating the responsibility or the event handler to a top element, and whenever something is clicked from in the nested elements, the delegate is actually what is listening to it. So it would go from child up top to that element, up the hierarchy, and then we can identify which item was clicked. This is what's called event delegation, and we do this by exactly the same thing, what is here. So if I go here and show you, this is exactly doing the same thing. Let's say we have a unsorted list or a UL. We can bind an event listener to UL, and then we can see what is the target. Was it an LI, a list item? If yes, then do something, otherwise don't do it. So that is how event delegation works. The good part about this is that whenever an item is created, we don't need to bind new listeners to that element. We can just have one parent listening to that event, and then we can see what item was clicked, because it goes from bottom to top or from inner side to external side. So that's how we can delegate this event. So in the card list item, we can always check what is the current element. So let's say if I do console log E, which is this click event. So we do a click event dot. So let's log the target here, and then I'm going to refresh and let's see. So I've added an item. Go forward, go to console, click price, see the event target, its item price. Similarly, if I click this title, see what happens. We get the title. If I click this number, what happens? We see the quantity element. If I click this plus button, we get the plus button. And we also see the plus click because we have the event bound, but ignore that. Now we have the minus button, so we get the minus. So we can exactly see what is the target. Okay, now I'm going to remove this handler from here, although we could do it, but since I wanted to teach you this event delegation method, that's why I'm going towards the other route. This is how what you see here is how basically React does it behind the scenes as well. So here I'm going to go and then remove that, and now here I'm going to check what is the target, what class does it have. So we're going to check, we're going to say, let's say target equals click event dot target, and then we're going to identify if it's the plus button or the minus button or the delete button, let's say. So here what we will do is that we'll say something like plus button. Let's say for the sake of plus button, we're going to check if target dot class list dot contains, if it contains FA plus, then we have the case of plus button. So here we have plus button. We're going to say console.log here plus clicked. Similarly, we're going to have another condition, else if, and here we're going to do the same thing actually. So it's going to be something like this. And then here we're going to check if it has a minus clause. So we're going to say FA minus. When we have this, then we're going to say minus clicked. So let's try this out now. And if that's not the case, then we're not going to be doing anything. So if we refresh now, add an item, I'm going to remove this breakpoint. Let's say if I click here, doesn't happen. If I click minus, you see minus clicked. If I click plus, you see plus clicked. So we are almost there. We already got these elements. Why do we get these elements? If we debug, we should be able to see clearly. If I click minus, this is the target that we get. So we got click event dot target, which is exactly this FA minus, but then we check the class list. This class list essentially is part of the DOM, the document object module, and this essentially shows what are the CSS classes applied to this target element. Now you can see that this is an I element or an I tag, which has two classes, the FAS and FA minus. Here you can also see these values, FAS and FA minus. And then the contains method allows us to pass a value against which it checks if FA plus is inside this class list, which it is, or which is it is not essentially. So it goes forward and checks the second condition. Does this class list contain FA minus? Well, it does. So when it finds it, it goes inside and clicks or uses the minus click. Okay, awesome. So I hope that you get it now. Now, the fun part, when we have the plus clicked, what do? Well, we do exactly what we were doing before with this edit item in cart with the increased quantity. So we use the exact same method when we have the plus click. But the thing is, now we don't have this existing item here in this context because this is an add events listener and this existing item does not exist. So what we need in order to get this existing item is first the ID of this cart item, and second this existing cart item because this expects a cart item. So what we can do here is that we can go here and see the exact same thing. So I'm gonna copy this one here, and we also need the item ID. So we actually need both of these. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to paste it here on plus click. So we need to find an existing item and we need to pass this into this existing item cart. But the thing is that we don't have this list item now here. So how do you find the list item? We already got this plus button. So if I click this plus, you see that we have this plus button, which is the click event, the target. Now I can go from this plus button to this list item, which is this one, and then find this ID. So what I'm trying to say right now is that we have this plus button which was clicked. I need to go up the DOM, find this item, which is the list item, and then get this ID. That's what I need to do. So in order to do so, what we can do is that we can look at this DOM object, which is target. This essentially has a property which is called parent or parent element. So this element's parent is action, right? If I go forward, I should be able to find its parent. So if I go here, I can try to see parent element, which is actions. If I try to find its parent, now this could go on and on and on. So if I go forward, you will see that we get the parent element, which is list group item, which is the exact item that I want. And then I can look at its dataset.id, and here we go. We get the 100 value of the dataset just like this from the DOM object. And this is what we actually want. I actually want to see if there's a way to do this in a better way. So let's see JavaScript find closest parent with class. So it says that we have this closest method that we can use with the selector. So let's try that. So if I go here and I try to find, hey, target.closest, and here I trying to find it with the class of the item, which is cart list group item, I can easily say dot cart list group item, and there we go. We find the item here. Boom. That's what we want. So I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna say here const list item equals target dot closest, and here we're gonna use the ID, the class. That's how we get the list item. From the list item we get the ID, and we then get the existing item. We don't need the exist because we already know it exists, because that's why we have clicked on the element. So we don't need the exists check here, but we need the existing item. And now we do the same thing. So let's try this out now in action. So I click this and then I click this again. So in that particular case, we should be clicking plus button. So if I click this, you see that it goes inside the plus logic. Then it tries to find the closest parent for the list item. It gets it. Then it tries to find dataset.id. It gets that as well. Then it tries to go inside and find the item existing with the ID, which it finds and returns the cart item. So you can see we got the related cart item here with the ID, with the price, with the quantity, blah, blah, blah. And now we are saying, hey, take this existing item, go in the edit item cart and increase the quantity. So it will do exactly the same thing as before. So all I need to do is go forward, and boom, exact same functionality that we can trigger now from two sides. All right. One, click here, it increases the value. Second, click here, and it also does the exact same thing. So see, that's why I actually love programming. You find one way of doing things and then you reuse. You don't have to do the same thing again if you're smart enough. So we are doing the same thing, but triggered from a different place. Now let's talk about how do we kind of decrease this quantity. In this event listener, for the plus button, we have done the logic. For the minus button, we're gonna do exactly the same thing. So I'm gonna remove this from here actually and move this above just like this, because we would want this list item and item ID in both these blocks. So it doesn't make sense to have it here and then also copy paste it here. What I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna take these out, take forward here, and now what we can do is that we can do some sort of same thing. So we got the list item here, we got the ID here. Now I'm gonna edit the item, but with a different sort of value or action. Actually, this existing item can also go out. So now what we are doing is that for plus, we are just logging plus clicked, and for minus we are logging minus click. Here we are going to say decrease quantity. Okay, now in this decrease quantity case, we need to write some code here for the logic of quantity. So let's say if we have the case where we need to decrease the quantity, we would just we're gonna say if this is decrease quantity, then what we need to do is cart item dot quantity minus, right? Once we do this, it's easy peasy from here because it's gonna do all the rest from itself. So if I go here, refresh, add one item, add this minus, boom, everything automatically calculates. Why? Because when we click minus, it does the exact same thing but just decreases the quantity. So if we try to understand what's happening, if I click minus, it comes here, it goes inside the minus case, which is this one, then it goes inside the edit item cart here, then it checks the value of the action, which is decrease, compares this, goes forward, decreases the quantity from 6 to 5. So now the quantity should be 5, but here you see 6. So here, then it's going to try to find the existing item, which is the DOM item, which is this one. So here in this particular case, the existing HTML has 1206, but the quantity now is 5. So it's going to go inside the render, take the new value of the quantity, which is 5, multiply it with the price, which is 200. So 5 into 200 is 1000. It will also update the quantity from 6 that you see on the screen here to 5. So it now will render the next value. Boom. There we go. So we handled plus and minus. Now let's talk about what should we do when we show delete. Okay, so in that particular case, we just have to handle one thing, and that is that we need to remove that item from the DOM itself. Okay, so what do we need to do when we have delete? So here we're gonna decrease the quantity, and after we can check if the cart item dot quantity is now 0. Then we need to do is, actually we're gonna find the existing item before that, but if the cart item quantity equals to 0, then we need to do existing item dot remove, and that's all. It removes itself from the DOM completely. All right, and then we are gonna move this condition into else. So if it's not 0, then we are gonna re-render it, but if it's 0, then we are gonna remove it. All right, so let's say I go and do this, click this, click plus, click minus, the value is 1, and if I click minus, boom, there we go, it removed itself. And that's what should happen exactly. So let's say I add this again. Now one more thing that we need to do is that when we add an item to the view, we add that to the cart items array. Similarly, if we remove an item from the view, we also should be removing that from the array. If we don't do so, what would happen? Let's see what happens. So if I add chicken pasta, click minus, it comes here, it will go forward, then it will go inside edit item in cart, then it will decrease the quantity becomes 0, it goes forward, quantity is 0, it removes the element from the view, but the cart items already has the cart item already. So if I go forward, the item is removed, but it is still in the cart items array. So if I check the cart items, what do you see? You see a cart item. Why? We actually have removed it, but we didn't remove it from the array. What do you think would happen if I add chicken pasta again? This cart item already is in the cart, already has a quantity 0, but when it will add it to the cart, you will see that it will be existing cart, but the quantity will be 1. But the thing is, it kind of sets an error. Why does it set an error? The reason for that is that although the cart item can be set, since it's already in the cart items list, what it will do first is try to increase its quantity, which it will succeed in. It will increase the quantity from 0 to 1. But after that, the code says whenever you are adding an item, then first increase its quantity, but then also go in the DOM and try updating it or re-rendering it. Now, where it comes to this particular code, it does not find it on the UI because we have removed it already. So even though if it's the cart, it doesn't exist on the DOM. Since it's not on the DOM or not on the view, this is the exact place where it fails. So we are trying to access something like cart item.index, inner HTML, and then it doesn't set it. So if I click here, see, this is the exact line where it fails, the inner HTML one. So here, when it comes here, the existing item is nothing and it fails. So if I click here again, you see that the cart item does have the quantity. Previously it was from 0 to 1. Now it's from 1 to 2, but the existing item does not exist because there's nothing on the UI. What would you update? So that's why it's important whenever we remove an item to also remove it from the array. And when we remove this, we also remove this from the array. How do we remove a particular item from the array? And one of the things is we could either use a splice, or we could essentially use the filter method from the array to filter out the array by removing that one item. So we already have the cart item here. So what we can do is that we can say cart items dot, or we could use the splice method as well, but then we would have to find the index. So instead of using the splice, we would have to do something like cart items equals cart items dot filter. And here we have a function, and in this function, what we return here, if that return value is true, then that item stays in the array. If that statement is false, then that item is removed from the array. All right. So what we do here is that we say in this cart items array, we have each item, or let's call it, let's say C item. So in this array, for each item, we are going to say keep this item if its ID does not match this cart item dot ID. And this cart item here is essentially this particular cart item that we are already working with. So we are saying, hey, check the cart items array and kind of remove every item that is not the same as, or kind of keep every item which is not the same as this current item that we want to remove. So let's try this out and we'll see what happens. One of the things that we need to change is that this cart items, since we are reassigning to this cannot be a const anymore. So we need to change this to a let. So make it let, and then we are going to try to work with this. So let's see what happens. So I'm gonna click here, let's click here, and let's say we go chicken pasta, and then we remove this. In this case, it will come here in the edit with the decrease quantity. So it will go forward, and there you will see that now if I move forward, you can see that in this particular case, what we have is this action is decrease. So it decreases the quantity by 1. So now it's gonna be from 1 to 0. And now moving forward, if it's 0, we remove this item from the DOM. And now we are saying, hey, in the cart items array, which only has one item right now, keep all the items which are not having this cart item ID. So what would happen is that this will go inside this whole filter method one by one. So it's gonna go here, and then it's checking, hey, the first item has the ID 100. This cart item also has the ID 100. Are they not equal? Well, that's false, because this whole situation will essentially return to false. So we only keep the items which return true in this condition. So since this is false, then the cart items will become empty because we remove the only item that was there. All right. So this is a clear technique, or clearer technique, that we can use for removing items instead of splice. And you will see in production applications, or actually coded by engineers who are working on live applications, that they mostly use this filter method and not splice in the most cases, not even pop in some cases. So here you can see that we use the filter, and now if I try to add the item again, no problem. We can remove it and we can add it. The delete icon, we discussed about this, that when we have this item decreasing the value to 1, then we should be showing the delete icon and not the minus icon. When it's 2 or more, then it's minus, but otherwise it's delete. Now beauty of this is that now that we have this whole situation here, and we also need to show total, yeah, that's accurate. So now we have this item here, you see that it's 1, but we don't show the delete icon. How do we do that? First, let's try to find that icon. So if we say delete, you will find that there's an icon that is called trash. So we can use the trash icon, which is this one. And what we do in that particular case is that we just need to use, instead of FA minus, we need to use the FA trash. And the beauty of this structure that we have right now is that we just need to replace this based on the quantity. This minus icon should become a delete icon when we have this quantity as 1, because then when we press this button, it should be removing the whole cart item instead of decreasing the quantity. So, and it's just like what we have here. So if it's positive or more than or equal to 2, then we show minus, otherwise we show delete icon. So with the FA minus, we can actually put a condition here, just like this, if I can put things correctly. So here we can put a condition, if the quantity is 1, then we should be using a delete icon, otherwise the minus icon. So we can say something like, if this dot quantity is greater than 1, then use FA minus, otherwise use FA trash. And once we save this, you will see that once we add an item, boom, we got the delete icon. All right. Now, if I click plus, what would happen? We would see the minus icon here. If I press minus, what would happen? The quantity would change to 1. And when we re-render this, we see the delete icon. And we are checking if this condition is true. So you could put this in a bracket. And then if this evaluates to true, then we do this. Otherwise, this is an else, we do this. So if the quantity is greater than 1, then we use the minus sign, otherwise we use the trash sign. Okay, so that's what's happening. And now since this is coded beautifully, you can see that now if I add any items, and if I add the same item multiple times, you will see that it only shows the delete icon when quantity is 1. Now this comes with a problem. Did you notice that problem? The problem with that is that now you will see that here, if I click this delete button, it doesn't work. We are not getting this working because the event or the class that we bound the click handler to was actually this fa minus and not fa delete. So all we need to do is to do the same thing. What we should be doing here is that we should be essentially just changing this to delete. Now I'm gonna make this a bit better in terms of code, and that is because first of all, when we have this condition here where we have either the target contains fa plus, if you see the cart item action, we had 3 different actions: one increase quantity, decrease quantity, and then delete item. So far we are not using the delete one, so let's use that properly. So what we are going to do here is that first we're gonna see, hey, this is fa plus, all right, do this. No, if it's fa minus, do this. Else we're gonna have another condition here just like this, and then here we're gonna say fa trash, and in this case we're gonna say delete clicked, and we are going to use the delete item value here. Now in the edit item card, instead of having this logic here, we can actually bind this to the delete operator itself. So here we could do something like or we don't actually need to do anything here. We can just check if the action is delete, then we are going to remove this as well. So let's quickly move this here. Then we're gonna kind of do this here, and actually let's try to get this existing item in the beginning. Existing item is here. Then first we are going to check, hey, if the action is delete. So we are going to say action equals cart item actions dot delete item. If that's the case, then do all this. So I'm gonna remove this from here. Else if we need to increase quantity or decrease quantity, then we do all the magic. So let me clean this up for you. So we cleaned up the code, and now the logic goes like, hey, we need to edit an item. How are we editing an item? Are we deleting that item? If that's the case, then we just need to do existing item dot remove, do this. Otherwise we check, hey, should we increase the quantity or decrease the quantity? And then we do the other stuff, okay? One of the things that you will notice is that in this if condition, even if it goes all through this line of code will still be evaluated. So we don't actually want that. We want this to happen. We are increasing or decreasing. We don't want this to end at delete item. So what we can do here is that we can just put a return here. That's one way of doing this. Another way of doing this would be to put it in 2 places, just like this. So now we do this only when either of these are true, or we would have to have another else condition that kind of looks dirty. So I'm not gonna do that. What I'm gonna do is just I'm gonna do this return here, and then even I'm gonna remove this if, because when you have a return statement inside an if, you don't need an else if in that case. So now the code looks like, hey, if the action is delete item, then we do all this and we return from here, which means none of this will be executed. If it's not that, then we do the rest of the stuff and all the magic. I also removed one line of code that I missed, so I'm gonna copy this now and now paste this right here. So now this is what we have, and now let's test this out. So let's say if we refresh this, add this item and click this delete button, let's see what happens. So first of all, it's gonna come under this click handler. So if I click delete, it's gonna come under here. Then it will check, hey, is this the fa trash one? Which it is. So it's gonna go here and inside this else if. Then it's gonna go into edit item in cart function with this delete action with the existing item, which is chicken pasta that you can see here. Then it would go inside here, and now since it's inside here, it's gonna go forward, find the existing item in the UI, which is this existing item. We can see that it's working. Then it's gonna check, hey, is the action delete? And yes, it is. So it's gonna go ahead and remove the existing item. It will also clear out the cart items array that we have. So the array then becomes an empty array, and then it returns. So none of this code will be executed. So you will see that as soon as I go forward, this comes out of the function, and that is what we needed, right? So that's how you would implement this whole situation. And now all we need to do, calculate this total. So we're gonna do that real quick. Cool. Let's try to find this total here. So in order to do that, we need to have some sort of calculation of this whole total. And we also need to render it whenever we do some change in the code. All right. So let's try to do that real quick. So what we'll do here is that maintaining a total for this whole cart. So what we can do is that we already have this whole array where we have all the cart items. All we need to do is just calculate the total of the cart. All right. One of the things that you see is that we have this parse float happening right here in the code where we show the price. So where we show this price, you see that here, whenever we do this thing here, you can see that it sort of shows the total value, but in actual, this cart item price if we have a look at the code, you see that this item price or cart item price is doing this logic here, this calculation here. So why don't we move this into a function that we can use also for the cart total? So I'm going to create a function here, a method here for this cart item, and that would be calculate total. And this calculate total essentially would return the value just like this. So I'm going to use this calculate total right here as well. And this function is going to be used for the cart total as well. And I'm just doing this because I don't want to do the same thing for the total as well. So what I will do is that I'll just loop through all of the cart items, call the total function or calculate total function for each of those, and then combine the total and show that on the UI. We need to create a function that allows us to update this value here, which is hard coded right now. So first of all, we're gonna go into the code, and in the HTML we have this price. What we are going to use is we're going to use a span here, and we are going to give this span an ID. We're going to call this cart total. This is the ID of this span, and here we are going to pass a value or kind of have a value here. Let's create a function that updates this value. So here, after this class, the cart item, and in fact just about here after the cart items, I'm going to create a function that will call update total. That's the name of the function. And this function's job is to update this HTML, this particular HTML, and put a value in that. So what it will do is that it'll do const cart total element, and here we're going to do a document dot query selector, and here we're going to use the ID cart total just like this, and then we're going to say something like cart total element dot text content equals something, let's say 1000. All right, so when we do this, we can call this function anytime and then just do this. So let's have a look at the code. So here, if I do something like update total, you will see that the total right now here is empty. And if I click here, you see the value is changed, right? So we have a function to update the total right now. This function should also take a value, let's say, and it updates that total on the UI. That could be one of the things, but this function could also calculate the total itself. So what would have, I'm just thinking about it. Maybe we need to have another function that calculates the whole total. We could just have this function that updates the total and also calculates it. Let's say we call it const recalculate cart total, and this function essentially does the job. So let's say this function is supposed to do the calculation and also then to call this update total function with a value. Let's say this calls this with 1000, and this is what we set, let's say here total value, and then we set this total value here just like this, and then we call update total with 1000. So if I now calculate or say recalculate cart total and then call it, you will see that it assigns the value 1000 here. But if I just do something like update total, then if I do 20,000, then it updates the UI as well. So recalculate total does not need a number. It recalculates it and uses this function inside. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to call this recalculate cart total every time we update or add an item. So here, whenever we click a menu item, that means that we are adding this item to the cart, or we are editing an item to the cart. So at the very end, I'm going to just call this function. All right. Similarly, whenever we edit an item using this click handler, then I'm also going to call this function and do whatever we talked about. So instead of actually recalculate total here, I can move it in add item to cart just here, and I can also move it inside edit item in cart. Maybe just move it here. Yeah, let's move it here. And then also let's move it. I don't want to put it in these three places. You know, I want the best code reusability I can get actually. So I could do this, and then I could do also that. In that case, I'm putting that into two places. Let's call this from on menu item click. Let's call it from here. So that's for sure. Now in the add item, edit item cart, I need to also call it from whenever we click the menu. So let's do this. Yeah. There is a way to do this, but I don't want to do that. So let's do some copy pasting. That's fine. That's fine. You're not going to judge me, right? Don't judge me for now. Let's say we recalculate the total right here, or we could put it right after here as well. That is also the problem with putting it here. We only want to do this when either of these conditions match. We don't want to do this if it doesn't. So we can't put it here. We have to put it in these cases, because there could be a case where we clicked on something else and kind of reached here, and that was neither the plus button, the minus, or the trash. So we only need to do that here. So let's say if I click here, you see calculate total is not defined, and that is because where do we have mentioned calculate total? Calculate total, where do we have that? We have this one here. Oh, we're using here. We need to use this dot calculate total here. In the class card item, we need to use this dot calculate total, otherwise this won't work. Makes sense. So if I click here, you see that the total is updated to 1000. Similarly, it would recalculate it anytime we add or update something. So if I go to recalculate total here, if I say console.log, you will see that recalculating. So if I save this, refresh this, click this one, you say recalculating. If I add an item or add the quantity, you don't see recalculating. Why? Because we haven't saved it. Oh, I have missed one place where I haven't used recalculate total, and that is when we click plus. Let's see here. So here we have plus. For plus, we are using recalculate total. For minus, we are using it. For trash, we are using it. Now, this is the problem with code duplication. You have to find it every time you fix it. But I'm going to fix it in a better way later on. So we click chicken pasta, we see recalculating. We click plus, we see recalculating. We click minus, we see recalculating. We delete item, we see recalculating. So all of this is working perfectly fine. Now let's talk about what this recalculate total does. What this should be doing is that this should go through this cart items and then calculate all of the total sum and then show that sum here with the update total. Now I could do this via the for loop, which would be something like this. I would just have, let's say, a variable. So we could say total, and here we could say 0. And then we could say something like cart items dot for each. So we are going to look at each cart item. Let's say we say cart item, and then we do something like, hey, const item total equals cart items dot, and here I could say something like get total. What was the function name here? This is called calculate total. So here, or actually let's say get total. I'm going to replace this here as well, this dot get total, and here as well, when we are calculating, we are going to say get total, and then we get that inside this item total, and then we add this value to the total. So we say total plus equals to item total, and finally we just use this total variable here. So we call it cart total actually, and then do something like this. Now let's debug this and see if this works. All right, so we click here, we see 200, then we click 200 plus, you see 400, you see that here as well. And we know how it works and why it works, because every time it kind of recalculates everything, it calls the recalculate cart total. So if I go here, 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 then we have this one here. So let's say if I click plus, it kind of does all the magic, comes inside the cart total. So here you can see the cart total here is 0. Then for each item it goes inside. So we only have one item, chicken pasta. So it will go inside. Then it will get the item total, which is right now, if you see the cart item, the price is 200, the quantity is 3. So this should return 600. And now it adds that 600 to item cart total, which is in total 600. And now finally this 600 goes here. Let's say we add another item for biryani. Then in that case, it calculates recalculate total. It goes inside. Then it goes for these two items, which is chicken pasta and biryani. Then it goes first for the chicken pasta. The total is 600 as before. It adds that to cart total. Then it comes for biryani, gets the total, which is right now 387. So it adds 387 to 600, which becomes 987. And here you see the value, and then the total, which is 600 here, becomes 987. Boom. All right. Now I think this makes sense for you. If I increase the amount, you see the total being increased. If I decrease the amount, you see the total being decreased. If I delete an item, you will see the amount recalculated as well. So everything here is working. But I would like for you to see also another way of calculating this whole value, which is the reduce method. So what we do here is that instead of running this for loop, we can use the reduce method on the array for calculating the sum. So here I could say something like this. Instead of this whole mumbo jumbo, we could say something like const cart total equals, and I would potentially put these two things for you so you can decide what you want. So I could say something like const cart total. Here I could say something like cart items dot reduce, and the reduce essentially takes a method and an initial value. So this is the method and this is the initial value, which is 0. So here we got it. Now this function or this method essentially gets two things. One is the accumulated value and then the next value. So the first time it starts with 0, so the accumulator is 0. Then the next item is exactly the cart item. So here what would happen is that we could say something like, or we could say something like existing total, or we could say total here, or we could say cart item here. So what we want to do is that we want to just return the total plus cart item dot get total. Once we do this, you will see that every time it comes, it calculates the whole total and then uses that. So let's try this out. I'm going to refresh. I'm going to first add this item. So you see the value 200 is right here. Now let's try adding another item. So let's say we add this dal chawal here. So once we do that, you see that it comes here. It runs a reduce on this array. Then it starts with this value 0 as the first value. So it goes inside, we have this total set to 0 and we get the first cart item, which is this one. It returns back the value of total plus the new total from this cart item get total. Then it comes back for the next item. So the first item is chicken pasta, as you can see here with the value 200. Then it comes for dal chawal. So if I go forward, you will see that now we have the total set to 200 because of this chicken pasta. And now we are getting the next item, which is dal chawal, and we are kind of calculating its price. Once we do that, then the total is finally received and it is set here, which is 300. So 200 plus 100 is 300. Now this is the method of using reduce with arrays. All right. So you can experiment with that. You can add values to this one. You can remove from this one as well. And that's how it goes. So now that we are done with all of the things, I cannot recall that there's anything left, to be honest. We got this card completely accurate. We got the code as well. I'm gonna just put it here to do. This stays here for the beginners who are not familiar with reduce. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much for watching the video. If you liked it, press that thumbs up button. If you're not subscribed to the channel, please do. That really helps the channel grow. And you can find all my socials on this link, and let me know in the comments what should I build next with HTML5, JavaScript and CSS. And as always, happy coding. I'm gonna see you later.